Yo, CrumbleBob here again. Today I've got a brand new round of family absurdity, straight from the depths of Reddit. Do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to your old pal, Bob. Wrap yourself up in your favorite blanket, grab some tea, and let's get started. My husband Matthew runs a successful YouTube channel about retro gaming and tech reviews that brings in around $180,000 a year, and we just returned from an amazing 2-week trip to Japan that he completely paid for, including first-class flights, fancy hotels in Tokyo and Kyoto, and all the experiences we wanted, like private tours and expensive restaurants. We were so excited to share our photos and stories with my family during our usual Sunday dinner at my parents' house. And Matthew was showing everyone the video he made about Japanese arcade culture that already had over 150K views in just 3 days. My sister Alice, who's 28 and a single mom to her 6-year-old son Jeremy, seemed really interested in our stories and kept asking questions about the places we visited, the food we tried, and how much everything cost. Matthew was being his usual generous self and started talking about how we were thinking of planning another trip next year, perhaps to Europe this time, and mentioned that we'd love to bring some family members along if they were interested, because traveling with people you care about makes everything more special. Alice's eyes lit up when she heard this, and she immediately started talking about how Jeremy had never been on a plane before and how educational it would be for him to see different cultures, while my parents started getting excited about the possibility of seeing places they'd only dreamed of visiting. Matthew was explaining how his channel had been performing exceptionally well lately, and that he'd been saving specifically for experiences like this, as he believed memories were more valuable than material things. And he mentioned that his most recent sponsorship deals had been particularly profitable. That's when Alice's entire demeanor shifted, and she got this odd look on her face, and she started asking Matthew very direct questions about his work schedule, and whether he ever felt embarrassed telling people what he did for a living. Matthew answered honestly that he typically worked about 6 to 8 hours a day creating content, editing videos, managing his social media, responding to sponsors, and handling the business aspects of things, but that he had the flexibility to work from home and set his own hours. Alice then inquired if he ever missed having a real job and working with other people, and Matthew just laughed and said he loved what he did, because it combined his passion for gaming with his technical skills and enabled him to connect with people all over the world who shared his interests. He mentioned that he had actually declined several traditional tech jobs over the years because his YouTube income was substantially higher than what any of those positions offered, and that he enjoyed the creative freedom and entrepreneurial aspects of running his own business. My parents were visibly impressed and continued asking Matthew questions about how he built his audience and succeeded in turning his hobby into such a thriving career. And my dad even stated he wished he'd had such opportunities when he was younger. But Alice became increasingly sullen-looking as the discussion progressed, and I noticed her jaw clenching each time Matthew mentioned money or success. Then Matthew began discussing the technical aspects of his setup and how he'd invested in professional-level gear for shooting and editing, and he stated he was actually considering bringing on an editor shortly, because his workload had grown so much that he was struggling to meet demand from both his viewers and prospective sponsors. He explained his plan was to utilize the additional time to concentrate on creating fresh content formats and potentially even launching a second channel dedicated to tech tutorials. That's when Alice completely erupted and declared, "So basically you sit at home all day playing video games while my sister works a real job to support you. And now you want to throw money around taking vacations and acting like some kind of big shot when you're really just a glorified housewife who got lucky with some internet fame that could disappear tomorrow." The whole table fell silent and Matthew's face turned beet red, but before he could utter a word, Alice pressed on with, "Real men go to offices and collaborate with others and contribute to society instead of making foolish videos about old Nintendo games that only shut-ins watch. And it's genuinely shameful that you're attempting to portray yourself as successful when you're essentially just messing around on the computer all day while others perform actual labor. I instantly rose and informed Alice that she was being utterly disrespectful, and that Matthew labored harder than most individuals I knew, and that his enterprise was genuine and prosperous, and she had no right to belittle his achievements simply because she didn't grasp his profession. I highlighted that Matthew had just proposed to cover a family trip that would amount to thousands of dollars, and instead of showing gratitude or even common courtesy, she was personally assailing him without cause. Alice retorted that she was merely being truthful about the circumstance, and that someone needed to indicate Matthew wasn't living in reality. And she stated it was pathetic that I was defending someone who plays video games for a livelihood, when there were individuals out there performing truly significant jobs like teaching and nursing work. She claimed Matthew was providing a poor example for Jeremy and my child by demonstrating that you could earn money without a real career, and that the whole YouTube thing was merely a phase that would end poorly. My parents promptly intervened and informed Alice that she was behaving entirely inappropriately, and that Matthew had consistently been respectful and kind to our family, and my mom expressed she was mortified by how Alice was acting towards someone who had just offered to take our whole family on a costly vacation. My dad said that Matthew's success was a thing to be celebrated, not attacked, and that Alice owed both Matthew and me a sincere apology. But Alice wasn't finished, and she carried on, saying that Matthew was weak and not a true man because real men didn't need to conceal themselves behind computer screens to earn money, and that I deserved someone who could support me through conventional employment, instead of what she called internet begging. She said the whole YouTube career was unsteady and irresponsible, and that Matthew should find a proper job before considering pricey vacations and behaving as though he was financially stable. Matthew eventually spoke and said softly that he was sorry Alice held such feelings about his work, but that he was proud of what he had created, and that he'd never requested funds or assistance from anyone in the family, only offered to share his achievements with those he cared for. He said he realized that not everyone grasped his business approach, but that didn't grant anyone the right to offend him in front of his family, and he left the table and stepped outside for some fresh air. I was utterly furious at this moment and told Alice that her conduct was appalling and utterly unacceptable, and that she had just offended and shamed my husband in front of our entire family for no cause other than her own envy and resentment. I pointed out to her that Matthew and I had been providing her with $800 each month for the last 2 years to assist with her rent and Jeremy's costs, and that we'd also covered Jeremy's school supplies, clothing, and multiple urgent expenditures, such as her car maintenance and medical invoices. I informed Alice that since she evidently held such firm beliefs about how Matthew earned his living and whether it met her criteria, she clearly wouldn't wish to take any further monetary aid from us, and that our regular payments to her would cease right away. I stated that if Matthew's earnings weren't sufficient for her regard, then they weren't sufficient for her bills either, and that she would need to determine how to cover her own costs from this point forward. Alice promptly began to retract her statements, claiming she hadn't intended it that way and was merely upset about her personal circumstances, but I informed her that she had made her sentiments regarding Matthew undeniably clear, and that there was no undoing the things she'd uttered. I mentioned that we had been assisting her out of affection and familial devotion, but that she'd demonstrated she didn't value or esteem us, so there was no reason to persist with the agreement. My parents fully supported me and informed Alice that she had overstepped a significant boundary, and that they concurred with my choice to discontinue the financial aid. And my mom added that Alice ought to reflect earnestly on how she treated individuals who had been unfailingly benevolent towards her. My dad stated that Matthew had always been nothing but kind and respectful to our family, and that Alice's assault on him was unwarranted and displayed poor character on her part. Alice began to cry, stating she was sorry and that she didn't genuinely mean what she'd uttered. But I informed her that the damage was done and that sorry wasn't adequate after the way she'd spoken to and about my husband. I affirmed that Matthew merited better treatment from my family, and that until she could truly grasp why her conduct was wrong and offer a sincere apology, I didn't wish to hear from her. Matthew and I departed soon after, and my parents phoned later that evening to apologize for Alice's conduct, and to inform us that they'd had a lengthy discussion with her regarding respect and gratitude. They mentioned they fully endorsed my choice to discontinue the financial aid, and that Alice needed to learn there were repercussions for treating people poorly, particularly those who had been generous to her and her son. Now 2 days have passed, and Alice has been texting me incessantly, claiming she's sorry and that she was merely having a difficult day, but she still hasn't apologized to Matthew personally. She continues to assert that she requires the money, and that Jeremy will suffer if we don't assist, but I believe she should have considered that before she chose to attack my husband's character and career in front of our entire family. Matthew states he's no longer angry, and that he comprehends Alice is likely having difficulties, but I can perceive he was truly wounded by her words, and I don't believe I can simply overlook this and act as if it didn't occur. The $800 each month we were providing Alice was funds we could have been saving or utilizing for our own objectives, and if she doesn't value it or respect its origin, then I don't perceive why we ought to persist. So, Ida? Edit. Many individuals are requesting his YouTube channel in the DMs and comments. I have inquired with him about it, and he mentioned that he doesn't wish his personal life to be revealed online. Certain details were already altered to remain anonymous, and I suppose that's the extent of it. Update 1. 2 days later, I've been reviewing all the comments, and I wish to address some of the critiques I'm receiving about not defending Matthew adequately during the dinner. Some individuals are suggesting I should have silenced Alice at once, and that I permitted her to continue for too long before I spoke. But I want to clarify what truly occurred, because I believe some people are misinterpreting something. When Alice initially began posing Matthew's specific inquiries about his work routine and if he yearned for a conventional job, it genuinely didn't appear that aggressive initially, and Matthew was responding to her questions serenely and seemed content to elaborate on what he did. I believed she was simply interested in his work, as he doesn't often discuss the business aspect of his channel at family meals, and her first few questions appeared like typical conversation. It was only when her face grew sour and her tone shifted that I understood she was aiming for something unkind. But even then, I figured perhaps she was simply having a tough day and would relent. Not until she labeled Matthew a glorified housewife did I grasp she was truly assailing him, and I rose and began defending him right after that remark. I didn't permit her to continue for minutes while Matthew sat there being disparaged. The entire interaction, from her initial harsh comment to me rebuking her, likely took less than 2 minutes overall, and I was countering her throughout that entire time. When she stated Matthew wasn't a true man, I instantly informed her she was showing disrespect, and that Matthew labored harder than most people, and I continued to stand up for him through the remainder of her tirade. A few people are also claiming I'm making excuses for Alice, or that I should have cut contact completely, instead of just stopping the money, but I am not making any excuses for her at all. What she said was completely wrong, and I've been very clear about that in my texts to her and in conversations with my parents. I stopped the financial support because that felt like the most immediate consequence for her actions, and it addresses the specific irony of her complaining about Matthew's money while taking it every month. As for cutting contact completely, I'm not ready to do that yet because Jeremy is involved, and he's innocent in all of this. Alice is his only parent since his father isn't in the picture, and while I'm furious with her, I don't want to punish Jeremy by completely severing his only connection to our family. But that doesn't mean I'm going soft on Alice or that I'm going to let this slide. I've told Alice through text that she needs to apologize directly to Matthew, not just to me, and that it needs to be a real apology where she acknowledges that what she said was wrong and hurtful. Not just sorry you were offended or sorry I had a bad day. I've been very clear that until she does that, we're not going to have any kind of normal relationship, and the money situation isn't even up for discussion. Matthew has been truly understanding about the whole thing, and he's not pushing me to handle it any particular way. But I can tell he was more hurt by Alice's comments than he's letting on. He's been working extra hard on his videos this week, and he's been quieter than usual during dinner. And I think Alice's comments about his work not being real really got to him, even though he knows she's wrong. My parents have been calling to see how we are, and they've made it plain to Alice that they believe her conduct was improper. My mom mentioned that Alice continually claims she didn't intend it, and that she was simply upset about her own circumstances. But my parents are not accepting that excuse, and they've told her that being frustrated doesn't grant her the right to assault people who have been assisting her. I am not altering my decision about the money or about demanding a genuine apology. Alice had no issue accepting Matthew's fake money for 2 years, and she had no issue being enthusiastic about a possible vacation he would have funded. So her abrupt concern regarding the validity of his career is clearly just jealousy and resentment speaking. Update 2, 6 months later, Alice was evicted from her flat last week and appeared at my door at 11:30 p.m. on a Wednesday night with Jeremy, pleading with me to allow them to stay with us because they had no other place to go. She was weeping and stating she'd attempted every possible solution and that she was in despair, and Jeremy was partially asleep and evidently bewildered about what was occurring. It emerged that after I ceased giving her the 800 monthly payments, Alice was unable to pay her rent and fell behind by several months, even though my parents assisted her with some emergency funds. She'd been employed at a restaurant, but couldn't secure sufficient hours to meet all her costs. And when she requested additional financial aid from our parents, they informed her they would only contemplate it if she first apologized to Matthew and began accepting accountability for her conduct. Alice evidently never offered that apology, and instead spent the past 6 months grumbling to anyone who would hear about how Matthew and I had forsaken her and Jeremy due to a misunderstanding, and she continued to insist that we ought to assist her irrespective of what had occurred at the dinner. My parents informed me that they'd proposed assistance with lesser sums for Jeremy's immediate necessities, such as food and school provisions, but they would not cover her rent or significant bills until she reconciled with us. When Alice appeared at my door, she promptly began discussing how Jeremy required stability and how he'd already endured sufficient upheaval in his life, and she claimed it would be heartless to penalize him for her errors. She repeatedly stated that Matthew and I possessed ample room in our home, and that it would merely be provisional until she could recover her footing, and she pledged she would apologize to Matthew and rectify everything if we would simply assist her through this predicament. I told Alice that I felt for her predicament and was distraught that Jeremy was enduring this, but that she'd had 6 months to apologize and try to mend the relationship, and instead had opted to play the victim and behave as if she were the injured party. I said that appearing at my doorstep with Jeremy late at night and using him to guilt me into helping was manipulative and unfair to everyone involved. Alice started getting angry, saying I was being heartless and that family was supposed to help each other no matter what, and she claimed it was ridiculous that I was holding a grudge over something she said when she was having a bad day. I reminded her that she had called my husband a glorified housewife and not a real man in front of our entire family, and that she had been taking money from us for 2 years while seemingly having no respect for how we earned it. I told Alice that if she was truly desperate for help, she should try contacting Jeremy's father and asking him to step up and take responsibility for his son, since he had been completely absent from Jeremy's life and had never paid a penny in child support. Alice immediately said that wasn't an option because Jeremy's father was unreliable and had his own problems. But I pointed out that he could not be less reliable than someone who had just gotten evicted and was homeless with a child. Alice started crying harder, saying I was being cruel and that she never expected this kind of treatment from my own sister. But I told her that I never expected to have my husband insulted and humiliated at a family dinner by someone we had been financially supporting for 2 years. I told her that actions have consequences and that she'd had many chances to set things straight, but she'd chosen pride over responsibility every single time. I provided Alice with the numbers for a few local shelters and told her that my parents might be willing to help if she was ready to actually apologize and take accountability for her behavior. But that Matthew and I weren't going to be manipulated into helping someone who had shown such disrespect for our relationship and his career. I also told her that she needed to stop putting Jeremy in the middle of adult conflicts and that using a child as leverage was not going to work on me. Alice left angry and crying, and she's been sending me text messages ever since, claiming that I'm heartless and that I'll regret this when something terrible happens to Jeremy. She's also been calling my parents and reportedly telling them that I threw a homeless child out on the street and that Matthew has turned me against my own family. But my parents aren't falling for her manipulation tactics. My mom called me the next day and said that while she felt sorry for Jeremy's situation, she agreed that Alice had brought this on herself, and that letting her move in without any accountability would just be enabling her behavior. My dad said that Alice had been given multiple chances to fix things, and that she'd chosen to play victim instead, and that they wouldn't be providing any major financial help until she took responsibility for her actions. Matthew has been supportive through this entire situation, and he even proposed that we could help Jeremy directly if Alice agreed to let him stay with my parents for a time while she sorted out her housing situation. But Alice refused, claiming it would be splitting up her family. Matthew said he felt sorry for Jeremy, but that we couldn't allow ourselves to be manipulated into assisting someone who had shown such disrespect. I know some people will likely consider me too harsh, but Alice has had months to rectify this, and she's chosen instead to reinforce her victim mentality. She has still not apologized to Matthew, and now she's attempting to use her son as a weapon to compel us to help her despite her ongoing disrespect. Final update. 2 months later, Alice arrived drunk at my house yesterday afternoon while I was at work, and Matthew was home with our 8-year-old son, and the entire situation escalated to the point where police had to be summoned, and Alice was arrested for trespassing and disrupting the peace. According to Matthew, Alice started banging on our front door around 2 p.m. and shouting for me to come outside and speak with her. When Matthew opened the door and informed her I was at work, she instantly started yelling at him, labeling him a pathetic excuse for a man and a parasite who had ruined my family by turning me against her. Matthew said he could detect alcohol on her breath and that she was evidently drunk and aggressive. Matthew attempted to close the door and told Alice she had to leave, but she pushed past him and forced her way into our house, still yelling and demanding to know my whereabouts. My son came downstairs to investigate the commotion, and Alice immediately started yelling at him as well, asserting that his father was a fake man who lacked a real job, and that my son should be ashamed to have Matthew as a role model. Matthew said my son began crying because Alice was screaming directly in his face and appeared completely out of control, and when Matthew attempted to get between them and shield my son, Alice shoved him and told him to behave like a real man for once in his life. Matthew promptly called 911 while Alice persisted in her ranting and pacing around our living room, and he took our son upstairs to his bedroom and locked the door until the police arrived. The police located Alice in our kitchen, rummaging through our refrigerator and still shouting about how Matthew had ruined her life and destroyed our family. And when they attempted to speak with her calmly, she started screaming at them as well and claiming that they needed to arrest Matthew instead because he was stealing money from children by no longer supporting Jeremy. The officers could tell she was intoxicated, and when they attempted to get her to leave peacefully, she refused, saying she wouldn't leave until she spoke to me. Matthew showed the police the security camera footage from our front door that clearly showed Alice forcing her way into the house after being told to leave, and he explained the background situation with the family conflict and how Alice had been harassing us since her eviction. The officers arrested Alice for criminal trespassing and public intoxication, and they informed Matthew he could also file additional charges for assault if he wished, because Alice had pushed him. I got home from work just as they were putting Alice in the police car, and she started screaming at me from the back seat about how I had ruined her life, and that everything was my fault for choosing a fake husband over my own sister. She kept yelling that Jeremy was going to grow up without a family because of my selfishness, and that Matthew had turned me into someone she didn't recognize. After the police left, I called my parents to inform them what had happened, and they were absolutely horrified by Alice's behavior. My mom started crying and said she couldn't believe Alice would yell at my son and scare him like that, and my dad said he was ashamed that his daughter would break into someone's house and terrorize a child. They immediately drove over to check on Matthew and my son, and to apologize for Alice's actions. Apparently, my parents were unaware Alice had been drinking, and they were stunned to discover she'd been arrested for public intoxication in the middle of the afternoon on a weekday. My mom mentioned that Alice had been staying with them periodically over the past few weeks, when she could persuade them to let her, but that they'd observed her behaving oddly and emotionally, and now they understood it was likely due to her drinking. My parents informed me that they'd been endeavoring to help Alice find stable housing and employment, but that she'd been undermining every opportunity by arriving late, behaving unprofessionally, or engaging in disputes with potential employers and landlords. My parents further told me that they'd been conducting some inquiries and discovered that Alice has been drinking excessively for at least the past month, and potentially longer. They found empty bottles concealed in their garage and realized that money they'd been providing her for groceries and Jeremy's school expenses had likely been spent on alcohol instead. They've concluded that they cannot allow Alice to reside with them any longer due to her drinking and their concerns for Jeremy's safety, but they intend to petition for temporary custody of Jeremy so he can have a stable home environment while Alice receives help for her alcohol problem. They stated they love Alice, but that she has become dangerous and erratic, and that Jeremy requires protection from her conduct. My mom suggested that Alice's drinking likely explains why she's been so hostile and irrational regarding the entire situation with Matthew and me, and why she's been incapable of maintaining employment or housing despite their assistance. My dad mentioned that they should have recognized the indicators sooner, but that they'd been rationalizing Alice's conduct because they wished to believe she was merely struggling with the strain of being a single mother. Alice remains in jail as of this morning because she couldn't post bail, and my parents stated they won't help her get released until she consents to go to rehab and receive treatment for her drinking. They've reached out to a lawyer regarding obtaining emergency custody of Jeremy, and they've also conversed with the school and Jeremy's doctor about the circumstances to ensure he's receiving the necessary support. I feel awful that it took this much time for everyone to grasp how severe Alice's problems had grown, and I feel regretful that my son had to endure her yelling and aggression yesterday. Matthew has been wonderful throughout this entire situation, and he isn't harboring any resentment against Alice despite everything she's subjected us to, and he's been focused on making sure he feels safe and loved. The police officer who managed Alice's arrest advised us that we should consider getting a restraining order if Alice continues to harass us after she is released from jail, and he said that her behavior yesterday exhibited clear signs of escalation that could become dangerous if she doesn't get help for her drinking. Matthew and I plan to wait and observe what happens with her legal situation and whether she gets into treatment, but we're definitely going to be more careful about our security and safety moving forward. But that's nothing compared to the next story. My sister Lisa always faced challenges, but this far surpassed anything I could have pictured. She's 28 and has battled addiction since high school, when she began associating with the wrong people and got involved with drugs and marijuana. I recall being in ninth grade while Lisa was a senior, observing her grades drop sharply and noticing her return home late at night, with bloodshot eyes and a hollow gaze that caused me concern. She quit during her senior year and never finished, which consistently caused our parents to fret about her future, and I could tell how much it pained my dad whenever anyone inquired about Lisa's intentions after high school. For years she moved between jobs, primarily serving at various bars and restaurants, and she would phone me in tears about being dismissed for arriving late or not appearing at all when she was using. I stopped counting how often my parents rescued her financially when she couldn't afford rent, or was evicted from yet another apartment, and a constant tension lingered in our home since Lisa would vow to get clean and then vanish for weeks on end. That's actually where she encountered her ex-husband Jake approximately 6 years ago, at this bar where she worked evenings, and he was a frequent patron who appeared unlike the typical undesirables she used to bring home. When they initially became a couple, Jake appeared beneficial for her because he encouraged her to get clean, and she indeed sought treatment and remained sober for a period. I recall experiencing this optimism watching Lisa during those early months with Jake, seeing her arrive at family dinners punctually and genuinely participate in conversations, instead of dozing off or inventing reasons to depart soon. They married rather swiftly and had 2 children, Emma, who's now 8, and Tyler, who's 6. And for roughly 4 years, circumstances appeared sufficiently stable that we all believed she might have ultimately changed her life for the better. She was working part-time and seemed to be managing motherhood adequately, even though there were always subtle indicators that caused me concern about how she was handling it all. Like how she would phone me in a state of panic over simple parenting dilemmas, or how Emma and Tyler always seemed a bit excessively attached when they were around other adults. Then our dad passed away unexpectedly last year from a heart attack, and Lisa just utterly collapsed in a way that brought back memories of her lowest points in high school. I could see the sorrow overwhelm her severely, and instead of relying on Jake or seeking expert assistance, she began to seclude herself and making these poor choices that placed those close to her in untenable situations. She began neglecting Emma and Tyler increasingly, leaving them with me constantly while asserting she needed to spend time with friends to cope with how overwhelmed she felt as a single parent when Jake was working lengthy shifts. Initially, I didn't mind assisting since I work from home, and my daughter Sophie truly enjoyed playing with her cousins. But it started becoming a habit where Lisa would drop them off after breakfast and not return until late in the evening, sometimes appearing disheveled and smelling of alcohol or something more potent. 8 months ago, when Lisa left the kids with me for a whole weekend without even phoning to check on them, and when Jake arrived to collect them on Sunday night, he was furious because he had no clue where she was. That's when I decided I had to inform him about what was truly happening, because I could see how bewildered and pained Emma and Tyler were becoming when their mom repeatedly vanished on them. Jake began investigating, and that's when he found Lisa roaming around the park near their home at 2 a.m. without shoes or her handbag, clearly intoxicated by something and utterly disoriented. We all attempted to get her back into treatment, but she refused to acknowledge she had an issue and kept offering excuses about how she was merely enduring a difficult period after Dad's passing. The breaking point occurred when Jake discovered she was having an affair with her drug dealer, who was providing her with whatever she was consuming. Jake immediately filed for divorce, and the custody dispute was harsh because there was just so much proof of her drug use, neglect of the children, and complete inability to function as a parent. The kids themselves didn't even wish to see her anymore because they were weary of being let down and hurt by her unkept promises and unpredictable conduct. They would decline her phone calls, and Emma once informed me that she felt safer when her mom wasn't present because she never knew which version of her she would encounter. 6 months ago, the court granted Jake full custody, and Lisa forfeited all parental rights save for supervised visits that she hardly ever attended. After losing her children, Lisa began appearing at my house every single day, and I truly mean every day from morning until night, as if she had no other place to go and nothing else to occupy her time. She would arrive right after Sophie departed for school and remain until after dinner, and I started observing that she was growing fixated on Sophie in a manner that made me genuinely uneasy and brought to mind how she used to become engrossed in things when she was consuming drugs. She would offer Sophie ice cream daily, even after I asked her to stop since it was spoiling her appetite for dinner. She would also dissuade Sophie from doing her homework, claiming she was too bright to require such extensive study, and even told Sophie she needn't fret about school because she was attractive enough that a man would provide for her when she matured. I recall the initial instance I heard Lisa utter that to Sophie, feeling a jolt of dread course through me because it was precisely the sort of harmful idea I never wished my daughter to internalize. Sophie was seated at the kitchen table attempting to complete a math assignment, and Lisa was lingering near her, continually interrupting and proposing they should do a more enjoyable activity instead. When Sophie mentioned she had to complete her schoolwork initially, Lisa laughed and stated that pretty girls like Sophie didn't have to concern themselves with mathematics, as they possessed other life advantages. I immediately intervened and clarified to Sophie that her education was important, irrespective of her appearance. The most troubling aspect was that Lisa began continually faulting my parenting, telling me that I labored excessively and failed to dedicate sufficient quality time with Sophie, and she persisted in suggesting that Sophie required additional amusement and excitement in her life, rather than all the organization and guidelines David and I had put in place. She would remark that Sophie appeared stressed or fatigued, implying we were pushing her too strenuously academically or not permitting her to be a child, and she would subvert our choices regarding screen time, bedtime, and household duties by informing Sophie that we were excessively strict. When my husband David made a sardonic comment about how Lisa might as well move in since she was always present, she took it seriously and actually suggested she could be Sophie's full-time nanny so I could concentrate more on work. I completely lost my composure at that point and told her she needed to depart and afford us some room, which resulted in a massive argument where she accused me of being egocentric and not comprehending how much she required feeling valuable and necessary to someone. Last week was Sophie's 11th birthday, and we had arranged this fantastic road trip to Disneyland that we had been discussing for months. Lisa discovered our plans and insisted that she wished to accompany us, and when I hesitated, she offered to manage all the planning and hotel reservations if we would simply cover all expenses. I considered that perhaps it would be beneficial for her to have something positive to concentrate on, and Sophie seemed enthusiastic about her aunt joining, so I consented even though an instinct told me it was an error. Yesterday was meant to be the day we departed for our trip, and Lisa had collected Sophie from school, as she typically does a few times weekly. But when 4:30 passed without them returning home, I began to feel uneasy. I repeatedly checked my phone and gazed out the window, assuring myself that perhaps they had paused at the shop or encountered traffic, but something felt amiss. I dialed Lisa's phone repeatedly, but it consistently went straight to voicemail, and by 6 o'clock I was in full panic mode because it was entirely uncharacteristic for her not to answer her phone when she had Sophie, particularly on a day we were scheduled to leave for vacation. My thoughts raced with every worst-case scenario, and I kept recalling her past with drugs, wondering if something dreadful had befallen both of them. I started picturing car accidents and drug transactions gone awry, and all the terrible things that could happen to an 11-year-old girl if her aunt was intoxicated and making poor choices, and I could feel my heart pounding so intensely I thought I might experience a panic attack right there in my living room. I called David at work, and he could discern the terror in my voice, so he hurried home immediately and found me pacing around the house like a confined animal, checking my phone every 30 seconds and calling Lisa's number repeatedly, even though it continued to go to voicemail. David attempted to reassure me by proposing rational explanations for their whereabouts, but I could also perceive the concern in his eyes because he was aware that Lisa's conduct had been intensifying and that something of this nature was precisely what we had feared might occur. We were both just walking around the house, trying to determine what to do and discussing whether we should contact the police, when I ultimately chose to phone my mom to see if she had heard from Lisa, thinking perhaps Lisa had brought Sophie there without informing us. When my mom answered the phone, I could instantly tell from her tone that something was amiss, and when I inquired if she knew where Lisa and Sophie were, she became very silent for an extended period before finally confessing that Lisa had taken Sophie to Disneyland. My mom elaborated that Lisa had been arranging this for weeks behind our backs because she felt she deserved the opportunity to forge special memories with Sophie since she never got to bring Emma and Tyler to Disneyland, and they now wanted nothing to do with her. Lisa had intentionally reserved hotel rooms and purchased tickets solely for herself and Sophie, and she had told Sophie that David and I were too occupied with work to take her, and that she was rescuing Sophie's birthday by ensuring she got to go. The detail that made me feel nauseous was discovering that my mom had been aware of this plan the entire time, and had concealed it from me, even though she asserted she initially tried to dissuade Lisa. My mom stated she felt pity for Lisa because she was so downcast about losing her own children, and she thought perhaps this would help her feel better, and she actually believed that I would comprehend once I witnessed how delighted it made Sophie. I was so enraged I could barely speak, and I immediately hung up on my mom and dialed 911 to report that my daughter had been abducted. The dispatcher recorded all the details, including Lisa's license plate number and a description of her car, and I made certain to inform them about her past with drugs and addiction because I was terrified about what might occur to Sophie if Lisa was relapsing. Approximately 2 hours later, the police called to tell me they had located Lisa's car and apprehended her, but she had struggled with the officers when they attempted to stop her and required physical restraint. They brought Sophie home, and she was bewildered and distressed because Lisa had been deceiving her the entire time, telling her that David and I had decided we were too occupied to take her to Disneyland, and that this was a surprise rescue mission to salvage her birthday. Sophie kept asking me why her aunt was arrested, and I didn't even know how to explain what had happened because I was still trying to comprehend it myself. The police officer informed me that Lisa would face charges of kidnapping and resisting arrest, and that there would likely be a court hearing in the next few weeks. I haven't spoken to my mom since I hung up on her yesterday, and I honestly don't know if I ever wish to speak with her again. I feel like she utterly betrayed my trust and placed my daughter in peril by facilitating Lisa's utterly irrational behavior, and I cannot grasp how she believed any of this was acceptable. David is enraged and intends to press charges to the maximum extent of the law, and I think I agree with him because this wasn't merely some family misunderstanding. This was an intentional kidnapping that involved deceit and manipulation and could have placed Sophie in grave danger. I don't know what I am meant to do now or how I am meant to manage this situation with my family. Everyone constantly tells me that Lisa is unwell and needs help, but at what juncture does being unwell cease to be an excuse for placing children in jeopardy? I feel as though I'm losing my mind because this entire situation is so far beyond anything I ever imagined would transpire in my family. Update 1 week later. I wish to provide an update to everyone who commented on my initial post, because the situation has grown even more complex, and I'm still endeavoring to process all that has transpired over the past week. Firstly, I extend my gratitude to everyone who affirmed that what Lisa did was unequivocally kidnapping and not merely some familial misunderstanding, as my mom continuously attempts to assert. I believe I required external validation that my response was not an overreaction, because I've been continually questioning myself since this occurred. The dread of not knowing your child's whereabouts and their safety is an experience I would not wish upon anyone, and I continually experience moments where my thoughts drift to all the dreadful outcomes that could have occurred had the police not located them precisely when they did. I know certain individuals in the comments proposed that perhaps I should have granted Lisa permission to take Sophie to Disneyland, but the reality is I would never have consented to let her take Sophie anywhere unaccompanied, because I do not trust her discretion or her capacity to ensure Sophie's safety, particularly given her background with addiction and imprudent conduct. The kidnapping has traumatized David more profoundly than I had anticipated, and he has not yet been able to return to work because he does not wish to leave Sophie unattended, even though she is at school during the day. He's been picking her up from school himself every day and remains with her until I'm finished with work. And I can see how much this whole situation has undermined his sense of security about our family's safety. David continually asserts that if something like this could happen with my own sister, then we can't trust anyone, and I'm starting to think he might be right. Lisa's court date is set for next month, and she's facing charges of kidnapping in the second degree and resisting arrest. I reached out to an attorney this week to grasp our available options and to commence the process of obtaining a restraining order against Lisa, because I don't want her close to Sophie or our family ever again. The lawyer clarified that since Lisa took Sophie across state lines without authorization and deceived her regarding our permission, this is undoubtedly a grave kidnapping charge that might lead to incarceration. My mom has been phoning and messaging incessantly, attempting to persuade me to withdraw the charges, and she continually sends messages arguing that Lisa is mentally unwell and requires therapy, not jail time. She repeatedly insists that Lisa was merely attempting to do something kind for Sophie because she's forfeited everything else in her life, and that I'm acting cruelly by undertaking legal action against someone who is evidently contending with depression and sorrow. The aspect that angers me most is that my mom persists in acting as though this was some impulsive choice Lisa made during a lapse in judgment, when the reality is that Lisa planned this for weeks and intentionally misled everyone involved, including Sophie. This was not a plea for assistance or an instance of despair. This was a premeditated scheme to take my daughter without my permission and deceive her about her parents' absence. The majority of my extended family has supported my choice to have Lisa apprehended, and my dad's sister, in fact, told me she believed Lisa had crossed an irreversible boundary. My uncle said that losing your own children does not grant you the right to take someone else's child, and that Lisa needs to confront the repercussions of her deeds rather than being condoned by those who pity her. I am set to meet with the lawyer again next week to complete the restraining order documentation, and we're also going to examine if there are any additional legal safeguards we can implement to ensure Lisa cannot contact Sophie or approach our residence once she is ultimately released from custody. Update 2, 10 days after Update 1. Matters have intensified in a manner I never anticipated, and I am genuinely fearful for my family's safety now. My mom appeared at our home 3 days ago and utterly lost control on our front porch, shouting at David and me while Sophie was standing directly there, hearing every word. I heard someone banging on our door at about 7 p.m., and when I glanced through the peephole, I saw my mom standing there with an expression on her face that I had never witnessed before, as if she were utterly furious and barely containing herself from exploding into violence. My initial thought was that perhaps something had happened to Lisa in jail, But the moment I opened the door, my mom began shouting at me, claiming I was destroying Lisa's life and being heartless to my own sister, and I could detect alcohol on her breath, which accounted for why she seemed so aggressive and out of control. She was yelling so loudly that our neighbors were emerging from their homes to see what was happening, and I experienced this intense embarrassment mingled with fear, because I had never witnessed my mom act like this in public before. Sophie came rushing from the living room, believing someone was in trouble, and my mom spotted Sophie and began directing her fury toward her as well, telling Sophie that her parents were being unkind to Aunt Lisa, and that we were going to send Aunt Lisa to prison for attempting to give Sophie a fun birthday trip. I could perceive the confusion and terror in Sophie's eyes as she observed her grandmother screaming at us, and I knew this was traumatizing her in a manner that might take years to undo. I quickly told Sophie to go to her room and shut the door, but she was already in tears and asking what was wrong with Grandma, and I could see how confused and frightened she was by the entire situation. David attempted to intervene and ask my mom to settle down so we could speak indoors, but she simply started shouting at him too, claiming that he had turned me against my own family and that before he arrived I would never have abandoned Lisa when she needed help the most. What astonished me most was hearing my mom say that what Lisa did wasn't a significant issue, and that we should have simply let her take Sophie to Disneyland, rather than involving the police. She persisted in asserting that Lisa was merely depressed and attempting to create some positive memories to compensate for the loss of Emma and Tyler, and that we were overreacting by treating it as a serious offense. I attempted to clarify that irrespective of Lisa's mental condition or family relationships, what she did was deliberate kidnapping that entailed lying to Sophie and misleading our entire family. But my mom simply talked over me and declared I was being dramatic. She even claimed that if I had been a more considerate sister and more supportive of Lisa during her divorce, none of this would have transpired because Lisa wouldn't have felt such a desperate need to connect with Sophie. That's when I became enraged and informed my mom that Lisa lost Emma and Tyler due to her personal decisions, her substance abuse, her neglect of her children, and her relationship with her dealer, and that those kids are better without such a self-centered parent. I stated that Lisa's issues are not mine to resolve, and that my sole duty is safeguarding Sophie from those who might harm her, even if those individuals are family. David had been endeavoring to remain composed and courteous until that moment, but when my mom started blaming us for Lisa's situation, he eventually broke and informed her that she was facilitating Lisa's conduct and that he desired to see Lisa incarcerated for as long as possible. He stated that anyone who would abduct a child and deceive them about their parents merited imprisonment, and that he was indifferent to whether Lisa was family or not. That's when my mom issued her ultimatum, which genuinely felt like a direct insult even though I ought to have anticipated it. She informed me that I had a decision to make between supporting Lisa by withdrawing the charges or being entirely disowned by the family and forfeiting any inheritance upon her death. She declared she could no longer bear to look at my face, knowing I was prepared to ruin my sister's life over what she termed a misunderstanding. My mom actually likened me to a savage animal for failing to protect Lisa, and she stated that I would come to regret destroying Lisa's life when I'm older and grasp that family is paramount. She informed me that I was being swayed by David to betray my own kin, and that she was mortified to have nurtured such a heartless daughter who would send her own sister to jail. The entire confrontation lasted perhaps 20 minutes, but it seemed like hours, and by its conclusion Sophie was weeping in her room, and David was so enraged I believed he might genuinely physically remove her. I eventually told my mom that she had to depart at once, and that if she ever appeared at our home again shouting in front of Sophie, I would also contact the police regarding her. After she departed, David and I determined that we needed to set up security cameras around our home because we no longer feel secure. knowing that my mom is this furious and might return, or that she might convey information to Lisa that could jeopardize us when Lisa eventually gets released from jail. We spent the subsequent day investigating security systems, and we're having cameras put in next week that will encompass our entire property and transmit alerts to our phones if anyone nears the house. I'm heartbroken that my connection with my mom has reached this point, but I decline to jeopardize Sophie's safety merely to maintain harmony within the family. David continually states that we're acting correctly and that anyone who cannot comprehend why we're safeguarding our child doesn't merit being in our lives, and I believe he's accurate, even though it's shattering my heart. Update 3. 3 months later. The court hearing finally took place last week, and I wanted to update everyone on the outcome because so many people have been following this situation and offering support through this entire nightmare. Lisa's trial was set for early February, and my mom had indeed hired lawyers to defend Lisa, which didn't surprise me given her behavior since the kidnapping happened. But it did sting to know she was willing to spend thousands of dollars to help Lisa avoid consequences while refusing to acknowledge the trauma Sophie had endured. Lisa's defense team attempted to portray her as a grieving, mentally ill woman who was merely trying to save Sophie's birthday when she realized that David and I were too busy with work to take her to Disneyland ourselves. And they introduced character witnesses who testified about how much Lisa loved children and how devastating it had been for her to lose custody of Emma and Tyler. The issue with that approach was that the proof against Lisa was immense, and her account shifted each time she attempted to clarify what occurred. The prosecution had records of all hotel bookings and ticket purchases that proved Lisa had been planning this for weeks. They had Sophie's testimony regarding the lies Lisa told her during the journey, and video footage from the arrest that showed Lisa fighting with police officers and resisting when they tried to stop her car. Furthermore, phone records indicated Lisa had been in touch with my mom concerning the plan for weeks prior to the kidnapping, which disproved both their assertions that this was a spur-of-the-moment choice born of desperation. Lisa actually testified in her own defense, trying to claim that she believed David and I had given her permission to take Sophie. But when the prosecutor asked her to clarify why she had told Sophie that we were too busy to take her ourselves, she couldn't offer a clear answer. She kept asserting she was merely trying to help and had no intention of harming anyone, but her explanation was illogical considering all the dishonesty and trickery involved, and I could observe the jury appearing doubtful each time she attempted to vindicate her actions. At one point, she began weeping and speaking about how much she longed for Emma and Tyler, and how bringing Sophie to Disneyland was meant to help her feel like a good aunt, as she could no longer be a mother. The judge plainly discerned Lisa's deception and falsehoods, and during sentencing he expressly noted that Lisa's utter absence of regret and her efforts to depict herself as the aggrieved party were troubling signs that she might replicate this conduct if presented with the chance. He stated that transporting a child across state borders without parental consent while misleading that child about their parents' approval constituted a grave offense deserving substantial penalty. Lisa received a sentence of 3 years in prison for kidnapping and an extra 6 months for resisting arrest, meaning she'll be incarcerated for a minimum of 2.5 years altogether. The judge further imposed a 4-year restraining order preventing Lisa from any contact with Sophie or approaching within 500 feet of our home, our places of employment, or Sophie's school. What I neglected to mention in my prior updates is that we likewise sought restraining orders against my mom, and those were also approved. The court acknowledged that my mom's conduct during the confrontation at our home and her persistent efforts to compel us into withdrawing charges against Lisa amounted to harassment and presented a danger to our family's security and welfare. The judge particularly remarked that my mom's failure to protect Sophie when she knew about Lisa's kidnapping scheme, along with her continued support of Lisa's actions and her threats to disown me if I didn't drop the charges showed a pattern of placing Lisa's desires above Sophie's safety and well-being. The restraining order against my mom is likewise for 4 years and includes the identical distance limitations as Lisa's. Having both restraining orders active has provided our family with a feeling of safety that we hadn't experienced since this entire ordeal began. Sophie is faring significantly better now that she understands neither Lisa nor my mom can reach her or appear at our home unannounced, and David has at last been able to go back to work without perpetually fretting over our security. David and I have also been attending couples counseling because this entire ordeal placed considerable strain on our marriage and compelled us to face some challenging inquiries about how to manage harmful family members and shield our daughter from individuals who could harm her. Time for another story you won't believe. I graduated from nursing school last Saturday, and my parents threw me a big party at their house with all our extended family, friends from college, and neighbors because this was a major accomplishment for our family, as I'm the first person to earn a degree, and they wanted to celebrate properly with everyone who supported me over the years. My sister Emily, who is 24 and 8 months pregnant, came with her husband Dennis, who she's been married to for 3 years, and I thought everything would go smoothly, as she seemed truly happy for me when I told her about the party, and even offered to assist Mom with the decorations. Emily has always been the sort of person who needs to be the focal point in all situations, and she's done things such as announcing her engagement at our cousin's wedding reception, revealing her pregnancy to everyone at our grandmother's 80th birthday party, and continually posting dramatic social media updates regarding minor inconveniences to gain sympathy and comments from others. The party was going really well, and everyone was congratulating me on completing nursing school, asking about my job prospects, and sharing tales of their own work experiences, while we enjoyed the barbecue my dad had been preparing since early morning and the cake my mom ordered from the upscale bakery downtown. I was chatting with my college friends near the back patio when Emily abruptly rose from her chair at the main table where she was seated alongside Dennis and began moving towards our group with this resolute look on her face that I knew from past dramatic incidents. She halted directly before me and Dennis, aimed her fingers straight at me, and declared loudly enough for all at the party to hear that I had been flirting with her spouse the entire evening and attempting to entice him while she was expecting and susceptible. The whole party became utterly silent, and all discussion ceased mid-sentence. Emily kept shouting that I was a terrible sister who couldn't bear to see her content, and that I was envious of her union and attempting to destroy her family, because I was resentful about being unattached and solitary. I attempted to explain to her that she was acting absurd, and that I had hardly spoken to Dennis apart from greeting him upon their arrival, but she continually cut me off and grew louder, while gesturing dramatically, and claiming she witnessed me touching his arm and laughing at his jokes in a way that was evidently improper. Dennis simply stood there, appearing shocked and uneasy, while all the partygoers gazed at this unfolding spectacle, and I could see my parents hurrying across the yard with concerned looks, because they could hear Emily's voice rising above all the ambient sound. I told Emily she was causing a commotion for no reason, and that she needed to sit down and stop embarrassing herself and everyone else. But she persisted and began crying while speaking about how betrayed she felt and how she couldn't rely on anyone in her own family. Then Dennis, who had been utterly silent the whole time and merely gazing at the ground, while Emily was leveling her accusations, abruptly looked up and stated that Emily was the one who had been cheating, and that the baby she was carrying likely wasn't even his. The whole party gasped, and Emily's face turned utterly pale as Dennis carried on speaking and mentioned that he had discovered text messages on her phone 3 weeks ago from someone named Randall, who she had been seeing behind his back for months, and that the pregnancy's timing coincided with when she was having the affair. Emily instantly began yelling that Dennis was lying and attempting to divert attention from his own conduct. But Dennis took out his phone and started reciting some of the text messages aloud, while Emily tried to snatch the device from his grip. The messages were plainly romantic and sexual in nature, and spoke of meeting up at hotels when Dennis was working late shifts, and one of them particularly discussed Emily being concerned about the pregnancy and whether she should inform Dennis of the truth about paternity. Emily was wailing and yelling that the messages were taken out of context, and that Dennis was trying to humiliate her in front of our family, but Dennis kept reading more messages that made it apparent she had been lying to him for months about where she was going and who she was spending time with. All the anger and frustration I had been suppressing about Emily's attention-seeking behavior over the years just erupted, and I completely lost my temper, because she had spoiled what was meant to be my special day with her untrue claims and drama. I stepped forward and pushed Emily hard enough that she stumbled backward, and when she tried to brace herself against a table, I seized her shoulders and began shaking her, while yelling that she was a selfish liar who couldn't tolerate anyone else having a moment of happiness. Emily started hitting me back, and we ended up in a full physical fight, right there in front of everyone at the gathering, with her tugging my hair and me striking her face, while our relatives and friends stood around in shock. My dad and two of my uncles had to physically separate us, while my mom was weeping and asking what was wrong with both of us, and Emily was clutching her pregnant belly and saying that I was trying to hurt her baby, while I was screaming that she had ruined my graduation celebration with her falsehoods and attention-seeking behavior. I never tried to hit her belly or anything of that nature. I was just angry and avoided the belly. Dennis merely stood there observing the entire fight without attempting to assist either of us. And after my dad separated me from Emily, Dennis declared to everyone that he was departing and that Emily could arrange her own transport home, because he was finished with her falsehoods and manipulation. He exited the party, while Emily was still weeping and pleading with him not to abandon her, and then she turned to our parents and began insisting that they pick between backing her or backing me in this predicament. The gathering essentially concluded after that, because everyone felt uneasy and didn't know what to utter or undertake, and most of the attendees departed within the next 30 minutes, while offering courteous excuses about having other commitments. My parents were distraught that my graduation festivity had transformed into such a catastrophe, and they spent the remainder of the evening attempting to comprehend what had occurred and how matters had intensified so rapidly between Emily and me. Emily eventually called her friend to come collect her, because Dennis had taken their vehicle when he departed, and she spent the whole time waiting for the lift, weeping and claiming that everyone was conspiring against her, and that I had always been envious of her existence. I assisted my parents in clearing up the decorations and surplus food from what ought to have been a joyful commemoration. AATA for reacting the way I did. Edit. I'm getting many questions about the specifics of what occurred and why the situation intensified so quickly. So I wanted to give some more background on my relationship with Emily and the history of her attention-seeking actions that led to this incident at my graduation party. Emily and I have never shared a particularly strong bond, because she's always been the kind of person who needs to be the focal point in every circumstance, and this has created difficulties at family gatherings for as long as I can recall. In our youth, she would do things such as feigning illness on my birthday, so that our parents would concentrate on looking after her instead of celebrating with me, or she would begin weeping and asserting that other children at school were harassing her whenever I invited friends to the house, so that everyone would console her instead of noticing my friendships. As we matured, Emily's attention-seeking actions grew more refined and cunning, and she discovered how to generate drama at significant junctures in other people's lives to shift attention back to herself. She revealed her engagement at our cousin Megan's wedding reception by rising during the speeches and displaying her ring while stating that Dennis had proposed to her that morning, which utterly eclipsed Megan's special day and sparked considerable friction in our extended family. When our grandmother celebrated her 80th birthday last year, and our whole family convened for a grand celebratory dinner at a fine restaurant, Emily delayed until everyone was settled and the meal was out before revealing that she was pregnant with her first child. She delivered this news by standing and clinking her glass to attract everyone's notice, and then she passed the remainder of the evening discussing her pregnancy signs and due date, while our grandmother's birthday took a back seat to Emily's announcement. Dennis has always been a reserved individual who dislikes conflict or theatrics, and he is a mechanic at a local garage and generally keeps to himself and avoids involvement in family disagreements, which is why everyone at the party was so astonished when he finally spoke out and unveiled the truth about Emily's affair. The reason I was so enraged about Emily's untrue allegations at my graduation party wasn't solely because they were untruths, but because this was supposed to be my moment to celebrate a significant accomplishment that I had labored intensely for over the past 2 years. Nursing school was exceptionally challenging and arduous, and I had to manage studying alongside part-time work to cover my expenses while living at home with my parents to save money on rent. I'd found academics tough in high school and never imagined I'd manage college-level coursework, but I was determined to pursue nursing since I wanted a stable career that would let me help people and support myself financially. When I finally graduated and passed my licensing exam, it felt like I had achieved something truly significant, proving I was capable of more than anyone had expected. My parents were immensely proud of my accomplishment because no one in our immediate family had ever graduated from college before, and they wanted to host a grand celebration to show how much my success meant to them and to thank all the people who'd supported me throughout nursing school. They spent weeks planning the event and invited everyone who had been part of my journey. Emily knew how important this party was to me and to our parents, and she also knew that her accusations about me flirting with Dennis were totally untrue because I'd been focused on talking to my college friends and catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in months. Update 1, 4 days later, I had a long conversation with my parents yesterday about Emily's behavior at my graduation party and the years of attention-seeking incidents that led up to this situation, and I told them that they bear some responsibility for what occurred, because they've always compelled me to pretend that we're a happy family instead of addressing Emily's problematic behavior directly. My mom and dad always held the view that family disagreements should remain private, and that we ought to show a united front to the outside world, no matter what went on behind closed doors. This meant that whenever Emily acted inappropriately or hurtfully, they would tell me to simply overlook it and not dwell on it, because family harmony outweighed individual feelings. When Emily revealed her engagement at Cousin Megan's wedding reception 3 years ago, my parents informed me that I was being trivial for being bothered by it, and that I should be pleased for my sister instead of concentrating on the timing of her announcement. They claimed that Megan wouldn't recall or mind this detail years from then, and that I was aggravating the situation by mentioning it and generating friction between Emily and the rest of our extended family. After Emily shared her pregnancy news at our grandmother's 80th birthday dinner last year, I attempted to discuss with my parents how this behavioral pattern was hurtful and disrespectful to others, but they brushed aside my worries and stated that Emily was simply thrilled about her life milestones and wished to share her joy with the family. They informed me that I was acting jealous and unsupportive, and that I needed to strive toward being more generous and understanding with my sister. I informed my parents that their unwillingness to confront Emily's attention-seeking conduct through the years had allowed her to escalate to where she felt confident making false accusations at my graduation party and that their method of consistently prioritizing family harmony over personal feelings had taught Emily she could get away with improper behavior as long as she presented it as sharing her joy or being emotional. My dad at first attempted to justify their parenting style by stating they had always treated Emily and me the same, and that they couldn't govern how their adult children opted to act at family gatherings. But I highlighted that equal treatment doesn't imply overlooking troublesome behavior, and that their inability to establish limits had directly played a part in the circumstances at my graduation party. I clarified to them that Emily's untrue accusations weren't merely painful for me personally, but that they had also shamed our whole family in front of friends, neighbors, and extended relatives who came to commemorate my accomplishment, and instead observed a dramatic incident involving affairs, paternity inquiries, and a physical altercation between sisters. I mentioned to them that some of these individuals might never feel at ease attending future family gatherings due to what they saw, and that Emily's conduct had harmed our family's standing in the community. My mom began to cry during this conversation and said that she hadn't understood how much Emily's behavior had been affecting me over the years, and that she thought I was just being competitive with my sister, rather than truly hurt by her actions. She confessed that they had likely been overly focused on preventing conflict and preserving the facade of family unity, and that they hadn't considered how their approach might be allowing Emily to persist in acting improperly. I told my parents that their apologies were welcome, but that I needed to see actual changes in how they dealt with Emily's conduct moving forward, and that I would not attend any family gatherings if Emily was there, unless she issued a public apology to all who observed her false claims and the ensuing drama at my graduation party. My dad inquired what I meant by a public apology, and I clarified that Emily had to reach out to all attendees of the graduation party and admit that her allegations against me were untrue, that she had caused needless drama at what should have been a celebration of my accomplishment, and that she was apologetic for placing everyone in an awkward situation due to her personal issues. My parents conferred about this privately for approximately an hour while I remained in the living room, and upon their return they told me that they had opted to prohibit Emily from all upcoming family gatherings until she fulfilled the public apology I had asked for. They mentioned they would phone Emily that evening and clarify their decision, and that they would also contact the extended relatives who were at the party to let them know they disapproved of Emily's conduct, and that measures were being implemented to handle the matter. My mom also expressed a desire to personally apologize to some of my college friends who had attended the party, because she was mortified that their initial impression of our family had been so unfavorable, and she inquired if I could give her their contact details so she could send them a note, clarifying that Emily's conduct did not reflect our family's principles. My parents phoned Emily that night while I was at work, and as per my mom, the discussion did not proceed smoothly because Emily instantly began weeping and claiming that everyone was ganging up on her during the most delicate period of her life. Emily contended that she was 8 months pregnant and coping with marital issues, and that the family ought to be backing her instead of reprimanding her for her emotional outburst at the gathering. Emily also asserted that Dennis had been behaving suspiciously and distantly for weeks before the party, and that she sincerely thought I was flirting with him, as she was feeling insecure and distrustful concerning her relationship. She claimed her accusations weren't intended to be malicious, but were simply a result of pregnancy hormones and stress about her marriage, and that she shouldn't be held accountable for Dennis's decision to disclose private information about their relationship before everyone. My parents informed Emily that they understood she was experiencing a tough period, but that her behavior at the graduation party was unacceptable irrespective of her emotional state, and that she had to accept accountability for the false accusations and the commotion she had caused. They clarified that the family ban would stay in effect until she fulfilled the public apology, and that they hoped she would use this time to consider her actions and strive to mend the relationships she had damaged. Emily ended the call before the discussion concluded, and she has not replied to any of their calls or messages since, which is quite characteristic behavior for her when she doesn't receive the desired reaction from family members. Update 2. A few days later, Dennis acted upon what he stated at my graduation party and insisted Emily undergo a non-invasive prenatal paternity to ascertain if the baby she's carrying is indeed his, and the results returned yesterday confirming he is not the child's biological father. Emily telephoned our parents this morning, weeping, and said that Dennis had expelled her from their home and informed her he was initiating divorce proceedings because he could no longer trust her and declined to raise another man's child. According to Emily, Dennis had been unresponsive and aloof with her since the graduation party incident, and he had been occupying their guest bedroom instead of sharing their bed while they awaited the paternity test results. When the results verified the baby was not his, Dennis reportedly told Emily that he felt utterly betrayed and exploited, and that he could not sustain their marriage, aware that she had been deceptive about the affair and pregnancy for months. Emily is now 38 weeks pregnant and might deliver at any moment, and she has no place to reside because she lacks sufficient savings to secure her own apartment, and the majority of her friends have withdrawn from her ever since news of the affair and untrue allegations disseminated through our social group. She phoned our parents, weeping and pleading with them to let her return to live in their home on a temporary basis until she can arrange a more lasting living arrangement after the baby is born. My parents were torn about their course of action because they had recently prohibited Emily from family gatherings until she expressed regret for her conduct at the graduation party, but they also did not wish to leave their expectant daughter without shelter during the final weeks of her pregnancy. They asked me how I would feel about Emily living in their house again, and whether I believed it would interfere with our relationship and my willingness to visit. I informed my parents that despite our current disagreement and my anger regarding the graduation party incident, I didn't think an innocent baby should suffer due to Emily's poor choices and actions, and that they should let her move back home temporarily to ensure she has a safe place to give birth and recover. I clarified that my issue was with Emily's attention-seeking behavior and false accusations, not with her unborn child, and that I could separate my feelings for her from my concern for the baby's well-being. I did tell my parents that I expected them to maintain some boundaries with Emily, even if they allowed her to move back home, and that she still needed to complete the public apology for her behavior at the graduation party before I would be willing to have any direct contact with her. I also stated that if Emily tried to use her pregnancy and homelessness to manipulate them into dropping the consequences for her actions, then I would reconsider my advice about letting her stay in their home. My parents agreed to let Emily move back home, with the understanding that this was a temporary arrangement focused on ensuring the baby's safety and health, and that it didn't mean they were excusing or forgetting her behavior at the graduation party. They called Emily back and informed her she could remain in her old bedroom until 6 weeks after the baby was born, which would allow her time to recover from childbirth and begin seeking a more permanent living arrangement. Emily returned to our parents' home yesterday with only 4 suitcases of clothing and some essential personal belongings, because Dennis had instructed her to depart at once and hadn't allowed her sufficient time to pack. According to my mom, Emily has been weeping nearly non-stop since her arrival, and continually states her life has unraveled and that everyone has abandoned her when she most requires assistance. Dennis evidently informed Emily that he would keep covering her prenatal medical costs and the delivery charges since they're still legally married, but that he would not offer any financial aid for the baby once it's born, as he's not the biological father. He also stated he wanted Emily to take out all her possessions from their home within the upcoming 2 weeks, and that he would be altering the locks and submitting the divorce documents promptly. Emily has been attempting to reach the biological father of her child, who is evidently the Randall individual, mentioned in the text messages that Dennis read at my graduation party. But according to my mom, Randall has been disregarding her calls and messages ever since he learned of the pregnancy. Emily told our parents that Randall is married with 2 children of his own, and that he had made it clear during their affair that he wasn't planning to leave his wife or take responsibility for any consequences of their relationship. My parents are finding themselves overwhelmed by having Emily back in the house because she requires a lot of emotional support and attention while she navigates the divorce, the impending birth, and her unclear future as a single mother. My mom said that Emily has been dominating their time with frequent conversations about her issues and anxieties, and that she's been asking them to make decisions for her regarding matters such as finding a lawyer, choosing a pediatrician, and applying for government assistance programs. I've been keeping away from my parents' house while Emily is residing there because I'm not yet prepared to interact with her, and I don't want to add further stress for my parents, who are already managing a difficult situation. I've been calling my mom every few days to inquire about how things are progressing and to offer practical advice about resources that might help Emily move towards independent living after the baby is born. Final update, 1 year later. It's been a complete year since the graduation party incident that ruined my relationship with Emily and revealed her affair and pregnancy lies, and I wanted to offer a final update on how everything has played out for our family and what the current situation looks like now that the dust has settled. Emily delivered a healthy baby girl named Grace 3 weeks after she moved back in with our parents, and the birth proceeded smoothly despite all the stress and drama surrounding the circumstances of the pregnancy. Dennis came to the hospital when Emily went into labor because they were still legally married, and he wanted to ensure she had support during the birth. But he made it clear that this was the extent of his involvement and that he wouldn't be taking any parental role with the baby. The divorce between Emily and Dennis was completed about 8 months ago, after a lengthy process that involved dividing their shared assets and determining spousal support payments, and Dennis ended up keeping the house while Emily received a small settlement that she used to pay legal fees and start a college fund for Grace. Dennis has been reasonable about the whole situation and didn't try to make the divorce more difficult than necessary, even though he had every right to be bitter about Emily's lies and betrayal. Emily never fulfilled the public apology that my parents had required before she could attend family events again, and she has largely remained a permanent resident in our parents' house, instead of finding her own place and establishing independence as a single mother. My parents sought and obtained legal custody of Grace when it grew evident that Emily was contending with depression and wasn't entirely able to care for a newborn by herself, and they've largely become Grace's main caregivers while Emily works part-time at a retail job. The biological father, Randall, has declined to recognize paternity or offer any monetary support for Grace, and Emily has been consulting with a family court attorney for the past 6 months to attempt to compel him to undergo a paternity test and pay child support. Randall retained his own attorney and has been contesting the paternity claim because he prefers his wife not to discover the affair, and he's concerned about how child support payments would impact his current family's finances. Even if Emily prevails in the case and obtains child support payments, the amount likely won't suffice for her to cover her own apartment and childcare expenses while employed full-time. My relationship with Emily has stayed strained and remote across this whole year because she never offered an apology for her false accusations at my graduation party or admitted that her conduct was unsuitable and harmful. We've only conversed directly a few times when I've been at my parents' house and she's been in the same room, and these exchanges have been courteous but distant, with no genuine attempt to resolve the core problems between us. Emily appears to have persuaded herself that everyone exaggerated what occurred at the graduation party and that she was the true victim in the situation because her marriage ended and she became a single mother with scarce resources. My parents have been contending with the monetary and emotional weight of providing for Emily and Grace, and they've visibly aged over the past year from the pressure of essentially beginning anew as parents in their late 50s. They love Grace and are dedicated to giving her a secure home life, but they've confessed to me in private that they're concerned about their capacity to manage the challenges of rearing a child while also attending to their own health concerns and retirement arrangements. I've endeavored to assist my parents by watching Grace sometimes and donating funds for baby necessities and costs, but I've upheld my boundary about not fostering a close connection with Emily. Grace is a blameless child who merits affection and backing from her wider family, but I decline to feign that Emily's conduct was permissible simply because time has elapsed. Let's move on to another unbelievable story. I'm 18, and my sister Emma turns 21 this weekend, and our birthdays have always been a huge source of tension in our family, because mine comes exactly 3 days after hers, which means every single year since we were kids, my parents would really go all out for Emma's celebration because hers is more important since she's older, and because her birthday apparently deserves the big party that combines both our celebrations, even though I never get any input on the planning, the guest list, or anything else of importance. This year was supposed to be different because Emma actually came up to me 2 weeks ago and said she wanted to do something special to include me in her 21st birthday celebration, and she suggested we could have sister bonding time where we talk about our childhood memories and our relationship, which honestly surprised me because Emma has never shown any interest in spending time with me or acknowledging my existence unless she needs something from me or wants to use my things without asking. She persuaded me to sit down with her last Tuesday evening when our parents were out at their book club meeting, and she took out her phone and started asking me questions about how I felt growing up in our family and whether I ever felt left out or ignored, which seemed like she was finally ready to acknowledge that our parents have always treated us differently, and that maybe she wanted to make things right between us. I talked for nearly 2 hours about how isolated and anxious I'd felt my whole life, how I'd had panic attacks since middle school because I always felt like I was walking on eggshells around everyone in our family, how I'd never felt able to express my true thoughts or feelings because Emma always got the attention and support, while I was dismissed or told I was being dramatic whenever I tried to speak up about anything that bothered me. Emma appeared very engaged and sympathetic during our conversation, asking follow-up questions and nodding at all the appropriate times. And she even hugged me at the end and mentioned she had no idea I'd felt that way and that she wished to do better as my sister, which made me hopeful that perhaps we could finally have a genuine relationship for the first time in our lives. Then yesterday I was searching for my charger in Emma's room because she had borrowed it and forgotten to return it. I tried to find her, but she was apparently out shopping with her friends, and I accidentally knocked over some papers on her desk. As I was picking them up, I noticed her laptop was still open, and I could see thumbnails of video clips that appeared to have been taken in our living room, so curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on one of the files. It was video of our entire conversation from last Tuesday, filmed from an angle that showed she had positioned her phone to record everything while pretending it was just sitting there casually, and I could tell that she had edited the clips down to the most emotional and vulnerable moments, where I was discussing my anxiety and panic attacks and feeling worthless. And she had included text overlays that made it appear like some kind of dramatic confession video. I scrolled through the project folder and discovered at least 15 distinct clips that she had assembled, including sections where I was crying while talking about how I sometimes experience panic attacks in my bedroom and have to bite my pillow to prevent making noise, because I don't want anyone to hear me breaking down, and another section where I confess that I sometimes miss meals when I'm feeling particularly anxious because my stomach becomes so tight that I can't consume anything without feeling sick. There was also a final video file labeled Emma's 21st birthday surprise that showed she was planning to play this compilation at her party tomorrow night in front of all her college friends and our extended family members, with a title card that said, "My Sister's Journey," as if it were some kind of inspirational documentary. And I realized that her sudden interest in bonding with me was merely a setup to obtain footage that would make her appear like a caring and supportive sister, while simultaneously revealing my most private struggles to everyone we know. I was absolutely furious and hurt and felt utterly betrayed, but I also understood that confronting Emma directly would achieve nothing because she would simply deny it, make excuses, or find a way to twist it around and make me the bad guy, as she always does whenever I try to call her out on her behavior. Instead, I decided to do some investigating of my own, and I began going through her laptop more thoroughly to see what else I could find. And that's when I discovered a hidden folder buried deep in her photo library that contained hundreds of pictures and videos from parties and social events she's been attending over the past 2 years. These weren't the carefully curated photos she posts on social media, where she looks perfect and responsible, but instead they were raw, unfiltered images that depicted Emma drinking heavily, kissing random guys at parties, smoking what was clearly marijuana in several photos, and even a few videos where she seemed to be taking pills that were definitely not prescription medication while laughing and acting completely reckless. There were also screenshots of text conversations where Emma was discussing with her friends how to lie to our parents about her whereabouts and who she was with, and several photos that showed her at parties, on nights when she told our parents she was studying at the library or staying over at her friend's house for school projects. The most damaging proof was a set of pictures from last month, where Emma was at some kind of warehouse party that seemed utterly illicit and dangerous, with people who were plainly much older than university students, and in many of the shots Emma was kissing and being very intimate with a man who appeared to be in his 30s, while she was visibly intoxicated or under the influence, judging by her look and gestures. I spent hours reviewing everything and chose around 50 of the most telling pictures that would utterly ruin the reputation Emma had carefully crafted for our parents and wider family, who all believe she's this flawless, diligent university student who never drinks or socializes and dedicates all her time to her academics and her part-time work. Emma's birthday celebration was scheduled for tonight, and it was the customary elaborate event that our parents arrange annually, with our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and approximately 20 of Emma's university friends, all assembled in our backyard beneath the string lights and decorations that our mother had spent weeks planning and arranging. I waited until everyone had come and was comfortable with their beverages and snacks, and then I offered to assist Emma in setting up the slideshow presentation she had put together for the celebration, which I was aware contained the edited video of my private confessions that she intended to spring on everyone as a surprise. When Emma went inside to get the laptop, I followed her and offered to carry it outside for her since my hands were free, and she handed it over without a second thought because she had no idea I knew what she was planning. Instead of connecting her laptop to the projector system our father had set up on the back patio, I quickly swapped her presentation file for the folder of party photos I had compiled, and I made sure the slideshow was set to advance automatically every few seconds so that once it began, it would cycle through all 50 images without anyone easily stopping it. I announced to everyone that Emma had prepared a special presentation about her college experiences and personal growth, and I started the slideshow before Emma could object or check what was truly loaded in the system. The first few photos that appeared on the large projection screen were relatively tame shots of Emma at what looked like normal college parties, but within about 30 seconds the images progressed to show Emma drinking heavily And then the photos of her making out with various guys began cycling through, followed by the images of her smoking and taking pills. Emma instantly began yelling at me to turn it off and rushing toward the projector, but our cousins and some of her college friends were nearer the gear, and they appeared paralyzed by shock at what they were witnessing. So the slideshow continued running, while Emma desperately attempted to clarify to our parents and grandparents that the photos didn't represent what they seemed. Before anyone could eventually switch off the projector, everyone at the party had seen at least 40 of the 30 photos I had selected, comprising the most compromising ones that depicted Emma with the elder man at the warehouse party, and several images where she was plainly affected by something considerably more potent than alcohol. Our parents were utterly appalled and enraged, and our grandmother, in fact, began weeping and stating she couldn't fathom Emma acting like that and deceiving the family about her activities, while our grandfather just stood there shaking his head and appearing utterly crestfallen. Emma's college friends appeared divided between those who were chuckling because they identified the gatherings and understood this was merely typical university conduct, and those who appeared uneasy and began fabricating reasons to depart early because they observed how distressed our relatives were growing. Emma was weeping and shouting that I had invaded her privacy and taken her private photos, and she kept attempting to inform our parents that everyone in university partied this way and that the pictures were presented out of context. But our mother was already in full panic mode and insisting on knowing how long Emma had been deceiving them about her location and actions. The celebration essentially fell apart after that, with the majority of the attendees departing within the following hour, while our parents debated with Emma concerning her conduct and sought clarifications for particular photos that had shown up in the presentation. I remained outside tidying the embellishments and vacant plates, while the family conflict played out inside the home, and I could hear Emma's voice becoming shriller and more frantic as she endeavored to account for the photos to our parents, while my mother's voice continued to interject with inquiries about particular pictures, and my father's deeper voice was insisting on knowing how long Emma had been dishonest about her university pursuits. Roughly an hour after the majority of the guests had departed, my father emerged and informed me that I had to enter at once to clarify how I had acquired Emma's personal photos and what I believed I was achieving by shaming her before our whole extended family. And his demeanor was already irate and blaming, which made it evident that Emma had managed to persuade them that I was the true antagonist in this scenario. When I went inside, I found Emma sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes and tissues strewn about her, while my mother stood behind her with protective hands on her shoulders, and the entire scene was clearly crafted to make Emma seem like the victim and me like the aggressor, which was precisely what I had foreseen would occur once the first shock of the photos subsided. Emma immediately started crying harder when she saw me and told our parents that she couldn't believe I would violate her privacy and try to ruin her reputation just because I was jealous of her birthday party, and she said that she had never done anything to merit that kind of cruel treatment from her own sister, which made me want to laugh because she was acting like she had completely forgotten about the recording and video project I had found on her laptop. My parents spent the next 2 hours interrogating me about how I had accessed Emma's computer and whether I had been spying on her for weeks or months, and they kept demanding to know what my real motivation was for wanting to hurt Emma so badly, while completely disregarding my attempts to explain about the video project she had been preparing and the fact that she had recorded our private conversation without my consent. Every time I tried to bring up Emma's recording plan, my parents would dismiss it as irrelevant or claim that I was inventing stories to justify my behavior. And Emma would just shake her head sadly and say that she had no idea what I was talking about and that I must have misunderstood something I saw on her laptop. By the time we finished talking that night, it was clear that my parents had completely bought Emma's version of events and that they viewed me as the aggressor who had deliberately sabotaged her birthday celebration out of spite and jealousy, and I realized that there was no point in trying to defend myself, because they had already made up their minds about who was telling the truth. Ida, for exposing my sister. Edit, many people are asking for more details about the situation and questioning whether my reaction was justified. So I want to provide some additional context that might help explain why I felt like I had no other choice but to expose Emma the way I did. First, regarding the recording situation, I want to be clear that Emma didn't just accidentally capture me being vulnerable during a casual conversation, but instead she set up what she presented as a bonding session specifically to get footage of me discussing my mental health struggles and personal problems. And she did this with the explicit intention of editing the footage into a presentation that would be shown to dozens of people without my knowledge or consent. Emma was aware that I have social anxiety and panic attacks, and she also knew that the idea of having my private emotional breakdowns broadcast to our extended family and her college friends would be completely devastating for me. But she planned to do it anyway because she thought it would make her appear like a caring and insightful sister who was helping me work through my problems. Second, I want to address the remarks about the photos I found and whether I was mistaken to use them as retaliation. And I understand that some people think I should have just confronted Emma directly or informed our parents about her recording plan instead of publicly exposing her party behavior. The issue is that Emma has always been the golden child in our family, and whenever I've tried to tell our parents about something she's done to hurt me or treat me unfairly, they automatically side with her and dismiss my complaints as jealousy or attention-seeking behavior, just as they did at the end of my original post. Last year, Emma took my car without permission and collided with a mailbox while she was drunk. And when I informed our parents what happened, they faulted me for not hiding my keys better and said I should be more understanding, because Emma was experiencing a stressful time with her college applications. 2 years ago, Emma stole money from my savings account that I had earned from my part-time job to buy concert tickets for herself and her friends. And when I found the missing money and confronted her about it, our parents made me apologize to Emma for accusing her of theft and said I should be happy to help my sister have fun experiences. Emma has always been able to sway our parents into believing that she's blameless and responsible, while portraying me as the problematic child who creates drama and invents stories for attention, so I knew that telling them about her recording plan would simply result in her denying everything and our parents believing her version of events over mine. The photos I found weren't simply random party pictures, but proof that Emma has been deceiving our parents about her college activities while receiving their financial support, and portrays herself as a model student who merits special treatment and bigger birthday celebrations because she's supposedly more mature and responsible than me. Our parents cover Emma's tuition, housing, food, and entertainment expenses because they believe she's focused on her studies and making good choices, whereas I'm expected to work part-time and pay for my own expenses because they think I need to learn responsibility and independence. Emma receives a monthly allowance of $600 for educational expenses, while I get $50 for my birthday and Christmas combined. And our parents justify this difference by claiming that Emma has proven trustworthy with money, while I haven't shown the same maturity. The party photo revealed that Emma has been using our parents' funds to support a lifestyle that involves illegal drugs, dangerous situations with older men, and reckless behavior that could severely affect her safety and academic performance, while she continues to receive praise and special treatment for being the responsible daughter. I felt that exposing Emma's true behavior was the only way to even the playing field and show our parents that their perfect daughter isn't who they believe her to be, and that maybe they should reconsider how they treat both their children moving forward. I also want to discuss the timing issue because many people have remarked that Emma's 21st birthday party wasn't the suitable moment for this sort of confrontation. And while I grasp that viewpoint, I think it's crucial to remember that Emma was intending to use her birthday parties as the setting to openly embarrass me with the taped clips of my admissions of anxiety. The slideshow I made employed the precise same layout and display method that Emma had arranged for my admissions, and I aimed for the identical group that she was intending to display my recordings to. So in numerous respects, I was just offering her a dose of her own tactics, using her very own approaches. I know that two wrongs don't create a right, and I'm not asserting my actions were ethically flawless, but I also think it's vital to recognize that Emma initiated this dispute by breaching my privacy and intending to capitalize on my mental health challenges for public amusement. And my reply was a direct consequence of her intended treachery rather than a random assault. Update 1. A week on, the repercussions from Emma's birthday gathering have been utterly wild, and my parents have formally gone crazy and concluded that I'm the bad guy in this whole predicament, even though Emma was the one who began this entire ordeal by taping my personal chats without my permission and intending to embarrass me before our whole wider family. The morning following the party, I awoke to my mother yelling at me from downstairs, insisting that I come down at once to clarify my actions and say sorry for what I had done to Emma and our family's standing. And when I arrived in the kitchen, both my parents were seated there with Emma, who was still in her sleepwear with red eyes from crying throughout the night. My father began the discussion by stating that my conduct at the party was totally inappropriate and that I had crossed a boundary that was irreversible, and he mentioned that Emma had clarified to them that the pictures I displayed were taken out of their proper context and did not reflect her true nature or principles. Emma had evidently spent hours following the party, persuading our parents that the images of her consuming alcohol and reveling were just normal university experiences that everyone engages in, and that the pictures of her with older men and ingesting pills were either doctored or depicted her in circumstances where she was being coerced by others to do things she wished not to do. She also informed our parents that I had felt envious of her birthday festivity and had intentionally ruined her party due to ill will, and she asserted that she had no clue why I would wish to harm her so severely when she had been endeavoring to be a more improved sister to me by arranging the connecting discussion we had the previous week, denied everything and said I was fabricating tales to excuse my conduct, and she asserted that any video files I might have observed were merely random recordings from her phone that had inadvertently been stored on her computer. My parents fully accepted Emma's account of what happened and declined to even consider the proof I attempted to present them, and my mother actually stated that even if Emma had taped our discussion, that would not warrant the manner in which I had openly shamed her and harmed our families, standing before our relatives and her university friends. The conversation rapidly intensified into my parents admonishing me about family allegiance and deference, and they declared that my actions had demonstrated to them that I could no longer be relied upon to reside in their home, because I had shown that I was prepared to injure my own sister and mortify the entire family simply to draw notice. My father declared that they were granting me 1 week to locate alternative accommodation, and that after next Friday I would no longer be welcome in their residence. And he stated this verdict was definitive and unchangeable, irrespective of any justifications or apologies I might provide. Emma remained there throughout, appearing sorrowful and victimized, occasionally dabbing her eyes with tissues and assenting when our parents spoke about how wounded and betrayed she felt, and she never once admitted that she had done anything improper. When I attempted to highlight that Emma had first breached my privacy and that her actions in the photos were truly troubling and perilous, my mother interrupted me and stated that what Emma did in her private time was none of my concern, and that circulating those images without her consent was an offense that could entail grave legal repercussions. My father added that Emma's university pursuits were a matter between her and them as her parents, and that my function as her sister was to back her and safeguard her privacy, not to observe her and employ her private photos as armaments against her. They also asserted that the party pictures did not depict anything unlawful or hazardous, merely typical college social interaction that I was too immature to comprehend, and they proposed that my response was driven by envy because I lack the identical social prospects that Emma possesses at university. The most aggravating aspect of this dialogue was that my parents persistently behaved as if Emma's recording and video editing endeavor was either wholly blameless or entirely unrelated to the circumstances, and they declined to concede that her scheme to display my anxiety admissions at her birthday celebration constituted a huge infringement of my trust and privacy. After roughly 2 hours of this repetitive debate, my parents informed me that I had, until next Friday, to pack my crucial possessions and locate a place to reside. They also told me that they would not be offering any financial aid for my housing or daily costs, because they stated I was legally an adult who had decided to prioritize harming Emma over preserving family ties, so I needed to confront the repercussions of my deeds on my own. Emma finally spoke up near the end of the conversation to say she was disappointed in me and had hoped we could work things out as sisters, but that she understood why our parents felt they couldn't trust me to live in the house anymore, and she said she hoped I'd learn from this experience and make better choices in the future. The whole thing felt utterly surreal, because Emma was acting like she was the innocent victim in this situation, while our parents were treating me as though I had committed some unforgivable crime by exposing behavior that Emma should be ashamed of anyway. Since that conversation, the atmosphere in the house has been utterly toxic, with my parents barely speaking to me except to remind me about the deadline for moving out, and Emma alternating between ignoring me completely and making passive-aggressive comments about how hurt she is by my betrayal. Yesterday, Emma brought up the recording issue for the first time since the party, but only to tell me that she was thinking about filing a police report about me accessing her laptop without permission, and she said that what I did might be considered theft and cybercrime depending on how the authorities interpreted the situation. I mentioned that her recording plan would have harmed my reputation and mental health in similar ways, but she just rolled her eyes and said that wasn't the same thing because she never truly showed the video to anyone, while I had certainly shared her private photos with our entire extended family. I've been spending the majority of my time in my room packing some of my belongings and figuring out where I'm going to live, and the entire situation feels utterly overwhelming because I have under 6 days to find housing and I lack sufficient savings to cover a security deposit and first month's rent for most apartments. I'm exploring options like youth hostels or extended stay motels that could be affordable given my part-time job income. What's worst is that I still believe I was right to expose Emma's party behavior, because she was planning to do something just as humiliating to me, and she has been deceiving our parents while taking their financial assistance for activities they would certainly disapprove of. But everyone in my family is behaving as if I'm entirely in the wrong, and that Emma's recording was either harmless or inconsequential, while my retaliation was unpardonable and criminal. And I'm beginning to wonder if I truly am the asshole in this situation, or whether my family is simply utterly dysfunctional. Update 2. 2 months later, it's been 2 months since my parents kicked me out, and the situation has become even more complicated and frustrating than I had imagined when I originally wrote about Emma's birthday party disaster. After my parents issued the ultimatum for me to move out, I spent that whole week phoning our extended family members to find out if anyone would allow me to stay with them temporarily while I planned my next moves, and the responses I got were truly crushing and made me realize how thoroughly Emma and my parents had controlled the narrative about what happened. I began with my grandmother on my mother's side, who has always been kind to me during family gatherings, and who I believed might be understanding of my situation. But when I called her and told her my parents had kicked me out and I needed somewhere to stay, she at once began to ask me why I had been so cruel to Emma at her birthday party. My grandmother informed me that my mother had phoned her the day after the party to explain I'd been acting up and creating issues for months, and that the slideshow incident was merely the last straw in a pattern of jealous and destructive behavior that had been worsening all through my senior year of high school. My grandmother said my mother had explained that I'd been stealing Emma's possessions, spreading gossip about her at school, and fabricating tales about her college activities because I was upset that she was more successful and popular than me, and that the party photos I had displayed were either false or acquired through illegal hacking of Emma's social media accounts. When I attempted to tell my grandmother the true story about Emma recording my anxiety confessions and intending to show them at her party, she interrupted me and said that my mother had already cautioned her that I would likely try to invent falsehoods to justify my actions and gain pity from family members. My grandmother stated that while she loved me, she couldn't offer housing for someone who was prepared to harm their own sister so severely, and she advised that I should concentrate on apologizing to Emma and my parents and attempting to rebuild the trust I had shattered, instead of seeking out people to enable my poor choices. I had comparable conversations with other extended family members. After a week of these crushing conversations with family members who had all been persuaded that I was the only villain in this situation, I recognized that I wasn't going to receive any support from our extended family and that I needed to seek out other options for housing and financial aid. My friend Rachel's parents agreed to let me stay in their guest room temporarily, but they made it clear this was a short-term solution and that I would need to find more permanent housing within a month or two. And they also said that I would need to contribute to household expenses and assist with chores to earn my keep. Rachel's family has been incredibly kind and supportive, but I can tell that having an additional person in their house is stressful for them, particularly because their guest room also functions as a home office and storage space. So I'm essentially living in a room that's filled with boxes and computer equipment. I've been taking on extra shifts at my part-time job to put aside funds for rent and deposits, but the earnings are minimum wage, so accumulating enough savings for an apartment has been exceedingly slow and frustrating. The most trying aspect of this entire situation has been handling college applications and acceptance notices, because I submitted applications to several schools before the party incident, and I had been anticipating replies from them around this time, but all my mail was still going to my parents' house. A couple of weeks ago, my neighbor friend Mark texted me, mentioning he'd seen a mail truck drop off a large envelope for me at my parents' house, and that it appeared to be a college acceptance letter, judging by the university logo on the return address. I promptly drove over to my parents' house using Rachel's car and rang the doorbell. However, no one answered, even though I could spot my mother's car in the driveway and hear the TV playing inside. So I rapped loudly and called out that I simply needed to collect my mail and wouldn't create any issues. Following roughly 10 minutes of knocking and calling, I attempted to call my mother's phone, but it went directly to voicemail. And when I tried my father's phone, the same occurred, so I understood they were deliberately ignoring me and declining to answer the door or their phones. I waited outside for another hour, hoping one of them would eventually emerge, or at least acknowledge my presence. But the house remained entirely quiet, and no one replied to my persistent knocking and calls. The following day, I attempted to return at an alternate time, believing my father might be home from work, but the identical scenario unfolded, and I began to panic that my parents might be intentionally keeping back my college acceptance letters to hinder my academic prospects. I called the admissions department at the university I believed had dispatched the letter, and they verified they had sent my acceptance package to the address I had supplied on my application, but they said they could not forward it to an alternate address without official proof indicating my relocation. The admissions counselor I conferred with proposed that I could submit a change of address request to the Postal Service, but that would require multiple weeks for processing, and I was worried that other urgent documents could be misplaced or held up during that period. I also attempted to reach my parents via email and text, clarifying that I required access to my correspondence for university applications and requesting they either send the letters to Rachel's place or inform me when I could visit to retrieve them, but they did not reply to any of my messages. The entire situation feels utterly unbelievable because my parents are effectively holding my future hostage over what occurred at Emma's party, and they appear prepared to jeopardize my university prospects simply to make a statement regarding family allegiance and the repercussions of my behavior. I've been endeavoring to remain concentrated on employment and accumulating funds, but it's extraordinarily challenging to focus on anything when I know there are likely numerous university acceptance letters located at my parents' home that I cannot retrieve, and that each passing day increases the probability that I'll overlook crucial deadlines for confirming enrollment or seeking financial assistance. Rachel's parents have been supportive and have proposed assisting me in determining lawful avenues for obtaining my correspondence, but I'm concerned that engaging attorneys or officials could escalate the circumstances and provide my parents with additional leverage to employ against me among our wider family. Update 3. A few weeks later, the situation with my parents withholding my college mail hit a critical juncture last week, and I was compelled to take a rather extreme measure to ultimately gain entry to my acceptance letters and financial assistance paperwork. But I believe it was justified because I at last possessed the documents I required to commence university in the autumn. After weeks of my parents declining to answer the door or reply to my calls and texts about my mail, I understood they would never willingly cooperate, and that I had to devise a method to compel them to recognize my presence and address the university papers accumulating at their house. I knew that my parents go to church each Sunday morning at the same church they had attended for more than 15 years, and that they deeply value preserving their standing as good Christian parents within their religious community. So I decided that facing them openly at church could be the sole means to make them consider my predicament earnestly. Last Sunday I rose early and took Rachel's car to head to my parents' church, getting there roughly 20 minutes prior to the service's scheduled commencement, so that I could intercept them in the parking area upon their arrival and ensure observers were there for our discussion. When my parents drove into the church car park and exited their vehicle, I promptly went up to them and stated audibly enough for other worshipers to overhear that I had to discuss my university acceptance letters and financial aid papers that were arriving at their residence. My mother's face became utterly pale upon seeing me, and my father promptly began heading toward the church entrance, while informing me that this was not the fitting moment or location for family matters. But I pursued them and persisted in speaking loudly about how they had been denying me access to my mail for weeks. Other church members began to stare and whisper as my parents sought to ignore me and walk faster toward the building. So I raised my voice further and stated that I was 18 years old and legally entitled to receive my mail, and that my parents were undermining my college applications by declining to let me pick up acceptance letters and financial aid forms. By this point, several people had paused to watch the situation unfold. My father finally stopped walking and turned around to tell me that I was making a scene and embarrassing our family in front of our church community. But I responded loudly that they had already embarrassed our family by expelling their 18-year-old daughter and then refusing to give her access to crucial college documents. Pastor Williams approached us at that point and inquired if there was some kind of family emergency that he could help us resolve. And my mother swiftly tried to explain that I was their daughter who had been having behavioral problems and was now trying to manipulate them by causing drama at church. I immediately countered my mother and informed Pastor Williams that my parents had kicked me out of their house 2 months ago and were now retaining my college acceptance letters and financial aid documents, which could prevent me from starting college in the fall if I missed important deadlines for replying to admissions offers. Pastor Williams appeared very concerned and asked my parents if my account was accurate, and my father hesitantly acknowledged that there had been some family disagreement and that I was no longer residing at home, but he said that I was overstating the matter and seeking to discredit them before the church community. I informed Pastor Williams that I had been endeavoring for weeks to schedule a time to retrieve my mail, and that my parents had been declining to answer the door or return my phone calls, and I stated that I was concerned they might be intentionally seeking to sabotage my academic prospects as retribution for an event that occurred months prior. By this juncture, many people had gathered around to overhear our discussion, and I noted that my parents were highly uneasy with the public scrutiny and the fact that other church members were learning of our family issues. Pastor Williams suggested we continue our discussion inside to his office, where we could have more privacy. But I responded that I didn't need privacy and that I only wanted my parents to agree to give me access to my mail so I could reply to my college applications. My mother finally responded and stated that they had received mail addressed to me and that they were prepared to forward it to whichever address I was presently residing at. But I informed her that was insufficient because some of the documents might require original signatures or immediate responses that could not be postponed by postal forwarding. Pastor Williams inquired of my parents if they would permit me to come to their house at an agreed-upon time to pick up my mail in person, and my father stated they would think about it, but that they needed to discuss the stipulations and conditions privately as a family beforehand. I observed that my parents were becoming exasperated with the public aspect of this discussion, and that they wished to conclude it promptly. So I opted to exert more pressure by noting that I had evidence of the family dispute that resulted in my expulsion, and that I would gladly share that information with Pastor Williams if my parents persisted in hindering my college applications. My father's face turned entirely crimson when I said this, and he asked what I meant by documentation, so I informed him that I still possessed copies of the photographs and videos that had initiated our initial disagreement, and that I also held screenshots of text messages and emails that illustrated how our family had addressed the circumstance. I stated that I was certain Pastor Williams and the church community would be very keen to learn about the sort of parenting decisions and family values that had resulted in an 18-year-old girl being homeless and unable to access her college mail, and I proposed that perhaps this would be a fitting subject for a future sermon about Christian family relationships. My mother instantly panicked and informed Pastor Williams that I was threatening to disseminate falsehoods and private family information to harm their reputation, but I calmly responded that I wasn't threatening anything and that I was simply indicating that the truth about our family circumstances might be pertinent information for their spiritual advisor and church community. Pastor Williams appeared very uneasy with the path the conversation was following, and he proposed again that we should relocate to his office to discuss the matter more privately. But my father promptly stated that wouldn't be needed, and that they would arrange for me to collect my mail sometime this week. I informed my parents that I required precise details about when and how I could access my mail, and that I was not going to depart the church parking lot until we had established firm plans that encompassed a particular date and time for me to come to their house. After several more minutes of discussion in front of the growing crowd of curious church members, my parents finally agreed that I could come to their house on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock to retrieve all mail that had been addressed to me, and they stated that they would have everything arranged and prepared for me to pick up promptly. Pastor Williams expressed that he hoped our family could resolve these challenges with prayer and understanding, and he volunteered to mediate any subsequent conversations if we required assistance communicating more efficiently. But my parents promptly refused his offer and stated they were certain they could manage the situation privately. My parents entered the church for the service, but it was clear to me they were deeply distressed and embarrassed by the situation, and I was pleased that I had at last made them address my college situation properly and agreed to provide me access to my mail. The last update. Tuesday evening eventually arrived, and I drove to my parents' house precisely at 6 o'clock, as we had arranged, and it was a relief to notice their 2 cars were in the driveway and the interior lights were on, meaning they couldn't feign absence as they had been doing for weeks. My mother opened the door after I knocked, and she promptly passed me a sizable manila envelope holding all the college-related correspondence that had been sent to their residence over the last 2 months, including acceptance letters from 3 different universities, financial aid award letters, housing applications, and various other crucial documents with rapidly approaching deadlines. I was immensely relieved to at last gain access to my college correspondence. The acceptance letter from my preferred university had been sent more than a month prior, and the cutoff for accepting their admission offer and submitting my enrollment deposit was merely 5 days off, meaning I had nearly lost my opportunity to go to the school I had long dreamed of. The financial aid documents were even more urgent, as several scholarship applications demanded replies within certain periods, and some deadlines had already passed, while my parents were denying me the necessary documents to finish the application processes. As I was examining the mail in the envelope, I inquired of my mother if I could also retrieve some personal items I had left when I moved. My mother's expression instantly turned hostile, and she informed me that I was forbidden from taking anything from the house because, technically, all my belongings were theirs since they had bought everything, and I was still a minor when most items were obtained. I noted that I was 18 years old and legally an adult, and that many of the items I wished to retrieve were gifts given to me specifically for my birthday or Christmas, or things I had bought with earnings from my part-time job. But my mother stated that was irrelevant because I had been residing in their home under their regulations when I obtained those possessions. She further stated that since I had opted to abandon the family and publicly humiliate them at church, I had relinquished my right to their generosity and financial backing, and this extended to retaining any clothing, electronics, or other items they had supplied for me throughout my upbringing. I attempted to reason with my mother, explaining that I required my computer for college studies, and that my clothing constituted essential items any sensible parent would permit their child to take upon moving out. But she continued to insist that I had chosen to prioritize attacking Emma over preserving family relationships, and therefore I had to independently confront the repercussions of that decision. My father then showed up in the doorway and backed my mother's stance, stating that I had proven I couldn't be relied upon to respect family property or privacy, and that permitting me to remove valuable possessions from their home would be rewarding my poor conduct and conveying the incorrect message regarding accountability. The discussion went on for approximately 30 minutes, with my parents growing steadily more obstinate and irrational in their refusal to allow me to take even fundamental necessities, such as clothing and toiletries, while I grew progressively more exasperated with their spiteful and vengeful demeanor toward their own daughter. At that moment, I understood that my parents would never be rational concerning this situation, and that they were resolved to render my college transition as challenging as possible, as retribution for revealing Emma's party conduct and declining to accept their account of what happened. I was utterly drained from months of enduring their manipulation and emotional abuse, and I was sick of their unending efforts to revise history and portray Emma as the ideal daughter, while treating me as a criminal for defending myself from her invasion of my privacy. So I gazed straight at my mother and told her that she could go fuck herself if she imagined I would plead for fundamental needs from parents who valued protecting their favored child's reputation more than backing their other daughter's schooling and prospects. I said that they could take all of my old possessions and shove them up their asses if they wished to be so trivial and spiteful regarding material items, because I no longer required anything from them, and I was fully able to construct a prosperous life without their assistance or sanction. My father instantly began shouting at me about disrespecting my mother and employing improper language in their house. But I interrupted him and informed him they had forfeited the right to admonish me about respect when they chose to expel me and undermine my college applications over a dispute Emma had initiated by recording me without consent. I stated that I was done pretending we were a normal family, or that they were reasonable parents, and that after I left their house that night, I never wanted to see or speak to any of them again, including Emma, who had manipulated them into believing her lies and victimization narrative. I stated that they had made their choice to put Emma's comfort and reputation above my safety and well-being, and that I was simply choosing to prioritize my education and future over continuing relationships with people who had shown me I couldn't trust them to support me when I most needed it. Before my parents could reply, I turned and went back to Rachel's car, bringing my envelope of college mail with me and leaving everything else behind without looking back, because I realized that clinging to material possessions from my childhood wasn't worth further exposing myself to their emotional manipulation and abuse. My focus is now on finishing my college applications and getting ready for my freshman year. And while becoming independent has been challenging and at times overwhelming, I'm grateful that I no longer have to contend with the constant stress and drama of trying to uphold relationships with people who clearly don't value or respect me. College begins for me in 6 weeks, and I'm eager to start this new chapter of my life, surrounded by people who know nothing about my family drama, and who will judge me based on my own actions and character, rather than comparing me to Emma or holding me accountable for conflicts I didn't initiate. I know that some people might think I was too harsh with my parents during our final confrontation, but after months of being treated like a criminal for defending myself against Emma's violation of my privacy, I felt I needed to make it clear that I would no longer tolerate their manipulation and emotional abuse anymore. Now, this next one will really shock you. My brother David has always been the kind of person who thinks he's funny, when he's actually just mean, and yesterday, at our family barbecue, things went much too far, and now everything has totally fallen apart. To give some background, my brother David is 32, and his wife Sarah is 29, and they've been married for about 6 years now. Sarah has had a very hard time conceiving and has suffered through 2 miscarriages over the past 4 years, which has been devastating for everyone concerned. She finally became pregnant again around 7 months ago and passed the stage where her prior pregnancies had failed, so we were all cautiously optimistic and excited for them. David has this awful habit of telling what he terms jokes that are truly just harsh remarks hidden as humor, and he's been doing this to Sarah for years. Yesterday was meant to be a celebration since Sarah is due in roughly 6 weeks, and we were holding a family gathering to mark the upcoming arrival. But David had been drinking beer all afternoon and started making his usual inappropriate comments. It began subtly, as it always does. He remarked something about how Sarah was finally fulfilling her role as a wife, and how he was pleased that his investment was yielding returns. Sarah appeared uneasy but remained silent, because she's learned through the years that confronting David only causes him to double down and become crueler. My parents, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin were all present, and we simply chuckled uncomfortably, as we always do, because addressing David about his conduct never ends well. But then David grew worse as he continued drinking, and he started remarking that Sarah had better not ruin this, as she had the previous times, and how he would ensure she didn't do anything foolish to end this one too. Sarah's face turned utterly pale when he said that, and I could see her hands trembling, yet she said nothing and simply excused herself for the restroom. When Sarah returned, David was telling my dad how he intended to raise his son to be strong and not weak, like Sarah's side of the family. And when Sarah sat down, David turned to her and uttered something I still find hard to believe he spoke. He said, and I'm relaying this verbatim because it's etched into my memory, "You know, Sarah, I'm starting to wonder if you actually got pregnant by someone else this time. Because God knows I would have let any man sleep with you if it meant finally getting an heir." The entire table became utterly silent, and Sarah simply gazed at him with an expression I had never witnessed on her face previously. My dad began to speak, but Sarah raised her hand and rose, and what transpired next was akin to witnessing a bomb detonate in slow motion. Sarah looked directly at David and said, "You want to know the truth, David? You're right. This baby isn't yours. I've been having an affair for the last 8 months with someone who actually treats me like a human being instead of a broken incubator. I'm done pretending this marriage is repairable, and I'm done letting you treat me like trash while I smile and endure it. I'm leaving you. I'm keeping this baby away from you, and I never want to see you again." She then turned to the rest of us and said, "I'm sorry you all had to witness this, but I can't do this any longer." And she walked out of the backyard, got into her car, and drove off while David just sat there with his mouth agape like a fish. David immediately began yelling and demanding that someone pursue her, insisting she was lying and merely trying to hurt him. But nobody moved because, honestly, we were all too stunned to grasp what had just occurred. When David realized that no one was going to chase after Sarah, he called an Uber, and the rest of us simply sat there in stunned silence for about 20 minutes before everyone decided to depart. That was yesterday, and now David is staying at my apartment because Sarah changed the locks on their home and won't answer his calls or texts. He's been pleading with me to call her and persuade her to return, insisting she was just angry and didn't mean what she said about the affair, but I honestly don't know if I want to help him. I love my brother, and I've always sought to support him, but seeing how he's treated Sarah over the years has been truly tough, and part of me believes that maybe Sarah finally had enough and decided to fight back in the only way she knew would hurt him, as much as he's hurt her. David keeps claiming that Sarah is being overly dramatic and that married pairs should be able to joke around. But what he was doing yesterday wasn't joking. It was intentionally cruel and meant to humiliate her before our whole family. I'm unsure what to do in this situation because David is my brother, and he's plainly heartbroken, but I also can't shake the image of Sarah's face when she finally broke. She appeared like someone who had been holding their breath underwater for years, and at last surfaced, gasping for air. I'm wondering if I should try to help David win his wife back, or if I should simply keep out of this whole situation. Update: I've received many questions regarding my previous post, so I wanted to clarify a few points and offer more context about the situation with my brother, David, and his wife, Sarah. First, I want to state clearly that our family doesn't bully or mistreat Sarah. This is solely about David's conduct toward her. The rest of us have always been fond of Sarah and made an effort to include her in family activities and discussions. My parents have always been kind to try to include her in family activities and conversations. My parents have always treated her kindly. My cousin gets along well with her, and I've always seen her as a friend. The issue lies specifically with how David treats her, and though we've all seen it unfold over the years, none of us have managed to stop it effectively. I realize I didn't offer enough context about David's behavior patterns in my initial post, so let me share some examples of the types of things he's been doing to Sarah throughout their marriage. These aren't just isolated events. This is how David treats Sarah regularly, and it's only worsened over the years. David has been unemployed for the last 3 years, and Sarah, working as a nurse practitioner, has been financially supporting them this whole time. Despite this, David frequently calls Sarah a gold digger in front of others and makes remarks about how fortunate she is to have found someone willing to look after her. When others mention that Sarah is actually the one working and covering the bills, David simply laughs and claims Sarah couldn't afford their lifestyle without him, which makes no sense, as he contributes no income. Following Sarah's first miscarriage, David began making jokes about her being defective and broken, and these remarks have persisted through all of her pregnancy challenges. He's made remarks at family dinners about how Sarah can't even do the one thing women are expected to be good at, and how he's beginning to think he chose the wrong horse. When Sarah becomes upset by these remarks, David tells her she's being overly sensitive, and that he's simply trying to brighten the mood during a tough period. David treats Sarah as if she's his employee instead of his wife, providing her with lists of tasks to do around the house and getting upset when she doesn't finish them precisely how he desires. He's told her that since she's the one working, and she has a habit of working, she should also be managing all of the household duties, because that's how partnerships function. When Sarah attempts to explain that she's exhausted from working long shifts at the hospital, David tells her that many women manage to work and maintain a household, so she must simply be poor at time management. The manner in which David speaks to Sarah in public is mortifying to observe. He interrupts her when she's talking, corrects her in front of others, and disregards her opinions on subjects even when she clearly possesses more knowledge about them than he does. When Sarah attempts to contribute to discussions about her work or current events, David will make remarks like Sarah thinks she's an expert on everything, or here comes Dr. Sarah with another lecture. He's essentially conditioned her to stop taking part in group discussions because he makes her feel foolish every time she speaks. David has also developed this tendency of testing Sarah's commitment to their marriage by making unreasonable demands and becoming upset when she pushes back. He's told her that if she truly loved him, she would quit her job so they could concentrate on having children, even though they rely on her income to survive. He's also told her that she should cut off contact with her friends, because married women shouldn't require friends outside their marriage, and that her close bond with her sister makes him feel as though Sarah doesn't prioritize their marriage. The pregnancy comments have been particularly cruel because David knows how deeply Sarah's fertility struggles have impacted her emotionally. After her second miscarriage, David informed people at a family gathering that Sarah keeps killing his children and that he was beginning to wonder if God was attempting to tell them something. When Sarah started crying and exited the room, David told everyone that she was being melodramatic and that she needed to cultivate a sense of humor about their predicament. During this current pregnancy, David has been making remarks about how he's going to ensure Sarah doesn't ruin this, and how he's considering employing someone to monitor her to make sure she's adhering to all of the doctor's recommendations. He's also been telling people that he's not going to get his hopes up about this pregnancy because Sarah has let him down previously, which is an incredibly painful thing to say about someone who has endured multiple pregnancy losses. I want to stress that I love my brother, and I've attempted to speak with him about his conduct over the years, but David doesn't believe he's doing anything wrong. When I've raised specific comments he's uttered, he tells me that I'm taking things out of context, and that Sarah understands he's just kidding around. He says that Sarah is overly sensitive, and that she needs to learn to laugh at herself, and he becomes defensive when anyone implies that perhaps his jokes are actually hurtful. The rest of our family has also attempted to address this with David, but he grows angry and accuses us of siding with Sarah against him. He's stated that we don't comprehend their relationship and that Sarah complains to us to make him appear bad, which isn't true because Sarah has never uttered anything negative about David to any of us. She's actually been remarkably loyal to him and has defended him when people have questioned some of his conduct. So when Sarah finally broke at the barbecue and disclosed that she'd been having an affair, I wasn't surprised that she had reached her breaking point. I don't agree with how she handled the situation, and I believe having an affair was wrong, but I also understand why she felt trapped and desperate enough to seek emotional support outside of her marriage. David is still staying at my apartment, and he's still maintaining that Sarah was just trying to hurt him, and that she'll return once she calms down. He keeps asking me to call her and explain that he's sorry, and that he wants to resolve things, but I'm honestly not sure if I should intervene. I feel awful for David, as he's clearly devastated, but I also feel this might be the consequence of years of treating Sarah badly, and perhaps he needs to face that reality instead of having me fix things for him. Update 2. After days of David begging me to reach out to Sarah, I at last agreed to meet with her yesterday afternoon. David has been staying at my apartment for almost 2 weeks now, and the constant pressure to fix things with Sarah was starting to wear me down. So I thought, perhaps, if I talked to her directly, I could gain a clearer understanding of where things stand and what might be possible going forward. I texted Sarah and asked if she would be willing to meet, and she agreed quite quickly, which surprised me, as I wasn't sure if she'd want to talk to anyone from David's family right now. We met at a place quite distant from the neighborhood where she and David live, and I could tell Sarah had been having a truly difficult time because she looked exhausted and stressed in a way I had never seen before. Sarah immediately apologized for how everything went down at the family barbecue and said she knew. The way she revealed the affair was hurtful and dramatic, but she had reached a point where she couldn't pretend anymore, and David's comments that day had pushed her past her limit. She mentioned she'd been planning to leave David for months, but hadn't determined how to do so, and when he made those appalling remarks about letting other men sleep with her, something within her simply snapped, and she chose to reveal the truth in the most startling way imaginable. I asked Sarah if what she had said about the affair was true, and she verified that, indeed, she had been involved with someone else for about 8 months. She clarified that she met this individual through work, and it began as merely a friendship with someone who lent an ear and treated her respectfully, but it ultimately developed into something deeper. She stated she was aware having an affair was improper, and that she ought to have ended her relationship with David before becoming involved with another, but she had been frightened to depart because David had persuaded her over the years that she was fortunate anyone would desire to be with her. Sarah informed me the baby is certainly not David's, and that she had already verified this with her physician, which means David holds no legal right to the infant. She mentioned the baby's father as someone who has offered support during her pregnancy and is eager to become a parent, in contrast to David, who has spent months uttering harsh remarks about her pregnancy and regarding it as an annoyance. When I inquired if there was any chance of Sarah reconciling with David, she was unambiguous, that she was finished with the marriage, and that nothing David might say or do would alter her decision. She stated she had devoted years to trying to please David and be the wife he desired, but she had at last recognized that David doesn't truly want a partner. He seeks someone to dominate and demean, and she was unwilling to expose herself or her child to such treatment. Sarah also informed me that David had been phoning and messaging her incessantly since her departure, and that some of his communications had been menacing and frightening. She mentioned David had been appearing at her place of employment and her sister's residence attempting to force discussions with her, and that she was thinking about obtaining a restraining order if he failed to cease. She displayed some of the text messages David had been transmitting, and they were truly unsettling. He was insulting her, menacing to pursue legal steps to claim his baby, and informing her that she would come to regret abandoning him. I felt awful reading those messages, as that is not the David I am acquainted with. But Sarah highlighted that this is precisely the David she has coexisted with for years, and that I've simply never witnessed this aspect of him, because he reserves his most terrible conduct for when they are by themselves. She stated David excels at portraying himself as a victim when others are present, but privately he is controlling and emotionally abusive in ways most people don't perceive. Sarah conveyed that she wished to uphold a relationship with me and the remainder of David's family, if feasible, as she has always felt welcomed and backed by us, but that she comprehended if we felt it necessary to pick sides. I was forthright with her and explained that while I grasp why she departed, and I don't fault her for wanting to escape David's conduct, David remains my brother, and my primary concern must be assisting him through this circumstance, even if I disapprove of how he has been treating her. Sarah mentioned she valued my candor, and that she didn't anticipate me to forsake David, but that she hoped I would urge him to seek some form of professional assistance, because his conduct has been worsening, and she's truly worried about what he might do. She stated David has never been physically aggressive towards her, but his emotional abuse has intensified through the years, and she's apprehensive that losing command of the situation might compel him to act dangerously. We conversed for approximately an hour, and Sarah remained very composed and rational during the whole discussion, which was not what I had anticipated given how David has been depicting her mental condition. David has been informing me that Sarah is experiencing some sort of breakdown, and that she's not reasoning clearly, yet she appeared entirely rational, and as though she had deliberated her choice with great care. When we were about to leave, Sarah asked me to let David know that she hopes he can find a way to be happy, but that she isn't changing her mind about the divorce, and that he has to stop contacting her. She also asked me to let him know that if he keeps harassing her, she will pursue a restraining order and get the police involved, something she wishes to avoid, but will do if required. David is unraveling completely, and I don't know what to do for him. When I informed David of my talk with Sarah, he grew angry and accused me of being manipulated by her. And he insisted that Sarah is lying about the affair, and only trying to hurt him, because she knows it's the single thing that would shatter him. David is sure that if he can just speak to Sarah in person, he can persuade her to come home and resolve their issues. But from my discussion with her, I don't foresee that happening. Sarah seemed quite firm in her decision and quite conscious of what she's sacrificing by leaving, but also made it very plain that remaining with David is no longer a choice for her. I am uncertain of my part in this situation because David plainly needs support, but I also don't wish to condone his actions or aggravate the situation for Sarah. I'm beginning to believe that David needs to come to terms with the fact that his marriage has ended and concentrate on determining how to proceed, but he's not prepared to accept that presently. Update 3. It's been roughly 6 weeks since my last update, and the situation with David has become so much worse that I genuinely don't know what to do anymore. After I told him about my conversation with Sarah and made it plain that she wouldn't reconsider the divorce, David completely lost it and moved out of my apartment in the middle of the night without telling me where he was going. The following day, I learned that David had gotten a room at a cheap motel and was spending his days drinking at various bars and trying to find out information about Sarah's whereabouts from mutual acquaintances. Sarah had temporarily moved in with her sister and was not disclosing her specific location because David had been showing up at places where he thought she might be, which was starting to scare her. Roughly a week after David moved out of my place, I received a call from a bartender asking me to come pick him up because he had gotten into a fight with another customer and was too drunk to drive himself home. When I got there, David was sitting outside the bar with a black eye and a cut on his lip, and he was so intoxicated that he could barely stand up. The bartender informed me that David had been talking loudly about his wife cheating on him and had gotten aggressive when another customer told him to keep his voice down. This turned into a routine during the following weeks. I'd receive calls from various bars and restaurants requesting I pick up David because he was creating issues or was too intoxicated to make it home safely on his own. David has never been a heavy drinker, so witnessing him drunk daily was truly concerning, and it was evident that he wasn't eating properly or looking after himself at all. The most serious incident occurred roughly 2 weeks ago when David got into a physical altercation at a bar and was ultimately arrested for assault. The other man evidently made a remark about David's predicament after hearing him complain about Sarah, and David landed a punch and ended up breaking the man's nose. I had to dip into my savings to post David's bail, and when I collected him, he was utterly unremorseful and kept asserting that the other man deserved it for disrespecting his marriage. At roughly the same time that David's drinking spiraled out of control, he also developed a gambling addiction that appeared out of nowhere. He began frequenting a casino about an hour outside of town and would vanish for full days at a time, returning penniless and asking me to loan him money for food and gas. When I inquired why he was gambling despite being unable to afford it, David informed me that he was attempting to win sufficient funds to hire a private investigator to locate Sarah and establish that she was untruthful about the affair. David grew progressively demanding about money and would become upset when I declined to give him cash or allow him to use my credit cards. He began appearing at my workplace seeking money, which was embarrassing and unprofessional, and when I informed him that he couldn't continue that, he accused me of forsaking him during the lowest point of his life. Last week, my parents and I determined that we needed to arrange some type of intervention because David's conduct was becoming dangerous and self-destructive. We invited him for dinner and attempted to discuss with him getting professional assistance for his drinking and his emotional issues, and we offered to help him locate a therapist or a support group for individuals experiencing divorce. David grew enraged when we mentioned the concept of therapy and accused us of believing he was insane. He stated that nothing was amiss with him and that the sole issue was that his wife had betrayed him and ruined their marriage, and that once he recovered Sarah, everything would return to normal. When my dad noted that Sarah had made it evident she wasn't returning, David began shouting and hurled a plate across the kitchen, which fractured against the wall. David then stormed out of my parents' house and didn't respond to his phone for 3 days, which left us all deeply concerned because he had been making remarks about having nothing left to live for and about how perhaps Sarah would regret it if something occurred to him. We were concerned that he might harm himself, so my dad went to the motel where David had been staying and discovered that he had checked out without settling his bill, and no one knew where he had gone. David finally called me yesterday, and he was phoning from yet another motel, this one even further from town, and he sounded entirely different than he had before. Instead of being angry and aggressive, he sounded defeated and exhausted, and he kept repeating that he couldn't grasp how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. He asked me if I thought Sarah would ever forgive him, and when I told him truthfully that I didn't think she would, he started crying on the phone, which was something I had never heard David do previously. I'm at the point where I don't know how to help David anymore because he refuses to acknowledge that his behavior contributed to Sarah leaving, and he won't consider getting professional assistance or making any changes to improve his situation. Every conversation we have ends with David asking me to contact Sarah on his behalf or to help him figure out a way to win her back. And when I tell him that's not going to happen, he gets angry and accuses me of not caring for him. I love my brother, and I want to support him through this difficult time, but I'm starting to realize that I can't fix this situation for him, and that my attempts to help might actually be enabling his destructive behavior. I'm considering stepping away from trying to assist David until he's prepared to help himself, but I'm also concerned about what might occur to him if everyone in his life stops trying to help David until he's ready to help himself. But I'm also worried about what might happen to him if everyone in his life stops trying to intervene. This entire situation has been emotionally draining for me, and it's beginning to impact my own mental well-being and my relationship with my boyfriend, who has been very patient, but is growing frustrated with the amount of time and energy I'm devoting to David's issues. I believe I need to establish some boundaries with David, but I'm uncertain how to do so without feeling like I'm deserting him when he requires assistance the most. Update 4. I genuinely can't believe I'm penning this update because what occurred yesterday is so far beyond anything I could have envisioned that I'm still attempting to process it completely. David has been apprehended for trying to abduct Sarah's newborn baby from the hospital, and I'm utterly shocked by how far he's descended and how perilous his conduct has grown. Sarah delivered a healthy baby girl 3 days ago, and apparently David learned about the birth through someone at Sarah's workplace who didn't realize David wasn't meant to have this information. Sarah had explicitly requested that her location and the baby's birth not be shared with David, but somehow the information reached him regardless. Yesterday morning, David arrived at the hospital wearing scrubs he had somehow obtained and informed the nurses he was Sarah's brother, there to see his new niece. The hospital staff had no cause to suspect him, as he knew Sarah's name and the baby's birth date, and they guided him to Sarah's room without checking his identification or confirming his relationship to Sarah. When David reached Sarah's room, Sarah was sleeping, and the baby was in a bassinet beside her bed. As the police informed me, David lifted the baby and began heading for the elevator, evidently intending to depart at the hospital with her. A nurse interrupted him to inquire where he was taking the baby, and David informed her he was taking the baby to the nursery for some routine tests. The nurse grew wary because David wasn't on the list of people permitted to move the baby, and when she requested to see his hospital ID, David grew agitated and began walking more quickly toward the elevator. The nurse pursued him and requested he stop, and when David declined, she alerted security while still following him. Security appeared just as David was attempting to board the elevator with the baby, and when they instructed him to surrender the baby and account for his actions, David suffered a complete breakdown. David began shouting that the baby was his, no matter who the biological father was, and that Sarah had stolen his child and his life, and that he was simply reclaiming what was rightfully his. The security guards were forced to physically restrain David to take the baby from him, and amidst the struggle, David was yelling and weeping, declaring that no one grasped what Sarah had done to him, and that he couldn't exist without his family. Authorities were summoned, and David was apprehended for attempted kidnapping, trespassing, and harassment. As it turned out, a restraining order against him already existed, which Sarah had obtained without any of us being aware. I received a call from the police station yesterday afternoon requesting I come in because David was asking for me, and they wished to verify details regarding his mental condition and recent conduct. When I saw David in the holding cell, he appeared entirely different from the last time I had seen him. He had shed a substantial amount of weight, and his hair was unkempt and dirty. David continued to insist to me that he had done nothing wrong, and that he was merely trying to see his daughter, despite everyone having explained to him repeatedly that the baby was not biologically his, and that he possessed no legal rights to her. He kept claiming that Sarah had manipulated everyone against him, and that the baby was his, irrespective of what any DNA test might indicate, because he had been married to Sarah when she got pregnant. The police informed me that Sarah was greatly shaken by what had occurred, and that she had been transferred to a different room in the hospital for security reasons. They also informed me that the baby was unharmed during the incident, but that David's behavior had been so unstable and aggressive that they were concerned about what he might have done if he had actually managed to leave the hospital with her. I asked the police officer what charges David was facing, and she told me that attempted kidnapping is a felony, and that considering the circumstances and David's recent history of harassment, he was likely facing significant jail time. She also told me that the hospital was reviewing their security protocols because David shouldn't have been able to gain access to Sarah's room so easily, especially since there was already a restraining order in place. I spent about an hour at the police station trying to speak with David and understand what he had been thinking, but it was like talking to a completely different person than the brother I grew up with. David kept switching between being angry and defensive about his actions and breaking down crying about how much he missed Sarah and how empty his life was without her. When I asked David what his plan had been if he had successfully left the hospital with the baby, he said that he was going to take her somewhere safe where Sarah couldn't find them, and that eventually Sarah would realize that they belonged together as a family and would come back to him. It was clear that David was not thinking clearly, and that he truly believed that kidnapping a newborn baby would somehow fix his marriage. I called my parents after I left the police station, and they were equally shocked and horrified by David's actions. My dad said that he was going to reach out to a lawyer to see what could be done to help David, but my mom noted that David's actions were illegal and dangerous, and that maybe jail time was what he needed to ultimately face the repercussions of his behavior. I've been thinking about this entire situation constantly since yesterday, and I continually return to the fact that David's actions could have gravely harmed a newborn baby and further traumatized Sarah after all she's already endured. The most troubling aspect of this entire situation is that David still doesn't appear to grasp that his actions were wrong, and he's still preoccupied with blaming Sarah for everything that's happened, rather than accepting responsibility for his own actions. I'm beginning to believe that David requires serious professional help, and that this situation is far beyond what our family can manage on our own. Final update. It's been 4 months since David was arrested at the hospital, and I wanted to give a final update on how everything has concluded, even though the result isn't what any of us wished for when this entire situation began. David received a sentence last week of 18 months in prison for attempted kidnapping, criminal trespassing, and violating a restraining order. His attorney had attempted to argue for a reduced sentence, citing David's mental condition and absence of previous criminal history. But the judge stated that David's actions had endangered a newborn baby and demonstrated a pattern of increasing harassment that necessitated serious repercussions. At the sentencing hearing, David was provided the chance to make a statement, and I was hoping that he would at last accept responsibilities for his actions and display some regret for what he had subjected Sarah and the baby to. Instead, David utilized his time to keep blaming Sarah for everything that had occurred and to assert that he was the true victim in this circumstance because his wife had betrayed him and ruined their marriage. David informed the judge that he had never meant to harm the baby and that he had merely wished to hold his daughter and spend some moments with her, even though numerous individuals had clarified to him that the baby was not biologically his and that he had no legal connection to her. He claimed that Sarah had turned everyone against him and that no one comprehended how much pain he was experiencing due to her affair and abandonment. The judge was clearly unimpressed with David's statement and noted that David had displayed no regret for his actions and appeared to have no comprehension of how his conduct had impacted other individuals. She stated that David's failure to accept responsibilities for his actions and his ongoing harassment of Sarah indicated he was likely to reoffend if he wasn't given significant jail time to reflect on his behavior. Sarah was also provided the chance to make a statement during the sentencing hearing, and it was the first time I had seen her since our meeting months earlier. She looked well and composed, and when she spoke, she was very clear about how David's conduct had affected her and her capacity to feel safe in her daily life. Sarah told the judge that David's harassment had commenced long before the hospital incident, and that she had been living in fear because of his threats and attempts to contact her. She said that David's effort to take her baby from the hospital had been the most terrifying experience of her life, and that she still had nightmares about what might have happened had the nurse not stopped him. Sarah also spoke about how David's emotional abuse during their marriage had impacted her self-esteem and mental health, and how his refusal to accept their divorce had prevented her from moving on with her life and healing from their relationship. She asked the judge to impose a sentence on David that would protect her and her daughter from further harassment and would hopefully motivate David to get the help he clearly needed. After David was sentenced, Sarah's lawyer announced Sarah had decided to leave town permanently with her daughter and the baby's father, to start fresh somewhere David wouldn't be able to find them once he was released from prison. Sarah had apparently been offered a job at a hospital in another state and felt relocating was the best way to ensure her family's safety and peace of mind. I approached Sarah after the sentencing hearing to apologize on behalf of my family for everything David had put her through, and to let her know we didn't support his actions and understood why she felt the need to protect herself and her daughter. Sarah was gracious and told me she didn't hold David's behavior against the rest of us, and she appreciated our family's kindness to her over the years. Sarah also told me she had named her daughter Luna, and that she was a happy and healthy baby being raised in a loving environment with people who would never treat her the way David had treated Sarah. She said while she was sad about how everything had ended, she felt relief knowing her daughter would grow up without being exposed to David's toxic behavior. I asked Sarah if she would be willing to stay in touch so I could get updates about Luna as she grew up. But Sarah explained she felt it was better to make a clean break from anything connected to David for her own emotional well-being and her daughter's safety. She said she hoped David would eventually get the help he needed, but she couldn't be part of his healing process, as her priority had to be protecting herself and her child. A few weeks ago, my parents and I visited David in jail. He was still insisting everyone had overreacted to his actions, and that Sarah was being vindictive by moving away and taking his daughter. David seemed to have no understanding of how his behavior had led to this outcome. I've started seeing a therapist to help me process everything that's happened and understand my own role in enabling David's behavior over the years. I'm learning that by constantly making excuses for David and trying to smooth over his conflicts with others, I was actually preventing him from facing the natural consequences of his actions and learning to treat people better. I don't know what will happen to David when he gets out of prison, but I've decided I'm not going to continue enabling his destructive behavior by bailing him out of consequences or making excuses for his actions. David is an adult who made his own choices. If he wants healthy relationships with people, he'll have to learn to treat them with respect and take responsibility for his mistakes. As for Sarah and Luna, I hope they're happy and safe in their new life and never have to deal with David's harassment again. Sarah deserves far better than the treatment she got from David, and I'm pleased she finally found the courage to leave and build a better life for herself and her daughter. Next story. So I have to tell you guys about what occurred at our first family dinner, and I'm honestly still processing everything that transpired. My fiancé, Jake, and I have been a couple for 3 years now, and we became engaged 6 months ago, but his family lives in Germany, so I've never actually met them in person before. We've had video calls now and then for birthdays and holidays, but that's largely it, and honestly, those calls were always somewhat awkward, because his mom would just gaze at me through the screen and make these strange comments about my appearance, or ask truly personal questions about my job and how much money I earn. Jake always said his mom was just protective and that she has good intentions, but I began to notice that during our video calls, she would make these small comments, like asking if I was consuming enough vegetables or telling Jake he looked like he was putting on weight, and that she has good intentions, but I began to notice that during our video calls, she would make these small comments, like asking if I was consuming enough vegetables or telling Jake he looked like he was putting on weight, and that he should be more mindful of his diet. Initially, I thought maybe it was just a cultural thing, or maybe she was just concerned about our health. But after a while, it started feeling really uncomfortable, and I could tell that Jake would get tense whenever she mentioned food or weight-related topics. His dad appeared pleasant enough on the calls, and his sister Emma was always courteous, but I sensed she was somewhat evaluating me too. For instance, she would ask me questions about my education and my family background in a manner that felt like she was trying to discern if I was suitable for her brother. Jake consistently reassured me that they would adore me once they met me in person, and that his mom simply takes time to become comfortable with new individuals, but I was genuinely quite anxious about their impending visit. They opted to come for 2 weeks to meet me properly and to begin discussing wedding arrangements, as we're getting married next year. Jake was so thrilled about their arrival, and he kept discussing all the activities we could do together and how wonderful it would be for me to finally meet his family face to face. He organized an entire itinerary, including tourist attractions and restaurants he wished to take them to, and he was particularly enthusiastic about hosting them for dinner at our apartment because he wanted to prepare a traditional German meal that his grandma used to make. I spent weeks getting ready for their visit, and I was genuinely striving to make a positive impression. I cleaned our apartment thoroughly, bought new dinnerware, and even acquired some German beer that Jake mentioned his dad would appreciate. I also went shopping for a lovely outfit to wear for the dinner because I wanted to look respectable and show that I was taking this seriously. Jake helped me practice some fundamental German phrases so I could at least say hello and thank you in their language, and he recounted stories about his childhood so I would have topics to discuss with his parents. The day they arrived, Jake picked them up from the airport, and I remained home to finish cooking because we had planned to have dinner that same evening. When they reached our apartment, his dad gave me a genuinely warm hug and told me in English that he was so pleased to finally meet me, and even his mom smiled and said, "I look good," which I considered a positive indicator. His sister Emma appeared weary from the flight, but she was sufficiently amiable, and she complimented our apartment, saying it was decorated very nicely. For the initial hour or so, everything was progressing quite well, and we were simply sitting in the living room discussing their flight and catching up on family news. Jake was translating back and forth between English and German because his mom's English isn't very strong, and I was starting to feel more at ease because everyone seemed to be getting along. But then we sat down for dinner, and that's when everything went entirely awry. I had arranged the table very nicely with candles and all, and Jake was so proud to be serving this meal that held significant meaning for his family. His dad was recounting tales about Jake as a child, and his mom was asking me questions about my job and where I was raised, and I believed we were actually connecting a little. I was eating normally and savoring the moment, while listening to his family discuss their life in Germany and posing questions to demonstrate my interest. But then, unexpectedly, his mom looked at my plate and made a comment in German to Jake, and I could tell from his expression that something was amiss. He somewhat froze and then replied to her in German in a way that sounded like he was disagreeing with her, and then she said something else in a very sharp tone. I inquired what was happening, and Jake looked genuinely uncomfortable and said it was nothing, but his mom wasn't finished speaking. She turned to me, and in her halting English, she stated that she was worried about my weight and that I needed to grasp that in their family, they prioritize their health and their appearance. She claimed she could see I was gaining weight and that I was borderline obese, and that if I was going to marry her son, I needed to embark on a strict diet before the wedding so that I wouldn't bring shame upon their family. She declared that she had been observing me eat during dinner, and that I was consuming too much and too quickly, and that she was anxious about the kind of precedent I would establish for their future grandchildren. I just sat there, mouth open, having no idea how to respond to something like that. I'm not even overweight, and no one has ever spoken to me that way in my whole life, particularly not at a dinner table in my own home. I glanced at Jake, and he appeared utterly horrified, while his dad was staring at his wife as if he couldn't believe what she had just uttered either. Jake instantly stood up and informed his mom in English that her words were utterly unacceptable and that she had to apologize to me at once. His mom began arguing with him in German, becoming quite defensive, claiming she was merely being honest and that someone had to tell me the truth. His dad then began shouting at her in German, and I could tell he was truly angry, even though I couldn't grasp what he was saying. Emma simply sat there, appearing uncomfortable, but she didn't utter a word to defend me or inform her mom that she was out of line. Jake continued telling his mom that she was being cruel and that I didn't deserve such treatment, particularly not in our own home when we had invited them for dinner. His mom persisted in insisting that she was merely trying to help, and that I ought to be grateful that someone cares enough to be honest with me about my health. Finally, his dad rose and informed his wife in English that she had crossed a line and that they were departing at once. He apologized to me, stating there was no excuse for his wife's words, and that he felt ashamed of her conduct. Jake was so distraught that he was trembling, and he informed his parents they could stay in a hotel for the remainder of their visit, as they were not welcome in our apartment following his mom's actions. His mom began weeping, claiming everyone was being unfair to her and that she was only trying to protect the family. But his dad instructed her to get her coat because they were leaving immediately. As they were heading out the door, Emma finally spoke, suggesting perhaps everyone was overreacting and that her mom didn't intend to hurt my feelings. But Jake told her that defending their mom's conduct was just as poor as her initial statements. After they departed, I simply sat at the dinner table, gazing at all the food still sitting there, growing cold, and I began to cry because I couldn't fathom that someone could be so cruel and hurtful without cause. Jake held me, continually apologizing and explaining that he never envisioned his mom would utter such a thing, and that he was so sorry I had to endure that in our own home. We ended up discarding all the food, as neither of us could eat after what had transpired. So now I'm sitting here, pondering if I'm mistaken for declining to contact his mom or attempt to mend this situation. Emma has been constantly texting me, stating that it's my obligation as the prospective daughter-in-law to set things straight with their mom and that I'm dismantling their family by failing to be the more mature person. She claims that their mom is simply traditional and that I ought to have realized she would have views on my appearance and way of life and that I'm being overly sensitive about the whole matter. Am I wrong for refusing to get involved in resolving this predicament that I didn't even cause? Update 1. Many thanks to all of you for the immense support and affirmation in the comments. It truly assisted me in feeling like I wasn't losing my mind or being too sensitive about what happened. I've been reviewing all your replies, and it's been genuinely reassuring to know that other people think his mom's behavior was as inappropriate as I believed it to be. I showed Jake some of the comments, and he was in fact relieved to see that other people were supporting us, because he's been contending with guilt and strain from Emma, who continually phones him and informs him that he ruined the family by expelling their parents. He's been deeply conflicted about the whole situation because he cares for his family, but he also recognizes that his mom's actions were incorrect, and he's been grappling with how to manage it all. Last night, we had this exceptionally lengthy discussion, and Jake told me some things about his childhood that he's previously kept from me, and now everything becomes considerably clearer. He mentioned that his mom had always been fixated on weight and food, and that she would regulate everything he consumed during his childhood. He shared that she would continually comment on his body and place him on diets when he was still a child. Even though his pediatrician affirmed he was perfectly healthy, he recounted that she would portion out his food at dinner and have him weigh himself each morning, and that she would draw comparisons to other children, telling him he was gaining weight or required more exercise. He also mentioned that she would remark on other people's weight in his presence and instill in him a habit of judging individuals by their looks, praising him when he shed weight, and becoming displeased with him when he gained any. Jake informed me that this led to quite severe eating problems when he was a teenager, and he indeed needed to consult a therapist in college because he acquired certain disordered eating patterns and body image issues. He stated that he's striven diligently to maintain a healthy relationship with food and his body, but being around his mom still causes him to feel anxious and self-conscious about eating. He also mentioned that Emma has consistently been their mom's preferred child because she's inherently slender and has never had issues with her weight. and that their mom would always hold Emma up as an illustration of how Jake should look and behave. He said that Emma doesn't understand what it was like for him growing up, because their mom never treated her the same way, and that's why Emma always takes their mom's side when there are family conflicts. This explains so much about why Jake grew so angry during the dinner and why he was so quick to defend me and kick his parents out. He said that hearing his mom speak to me the same way she used to speak to him brought back all these terrible memories and made him realize that he couldn't let her treat the person he loves the same way she treated him as a child. He also said that he's been worried about bringing kids into this family dynamic because he doesn't want his mom to do to our future children what she did to him, and that this incident made him realize that he needs to set much stronger boundaries with her if we're going to have a healthy relationship going forward. I asked him why he never told me about any of this before, and Jake, said that he doesn't regret defending me and that he would do it again in a heartbeat, but that he's sad this is how his family met me and that his mom's problems are now impacting our relationship as well. Emma is still continually texting me and saying that I need to be the one to resolve things, because I'm the newcomer and it's my duty to adjust to their family dynamics. But Jake told her very clearly that I don't need to fix anything because I did nothing wrong, and that if anyone needs to apologize and alter their conduct, it's their mom. He said that Emma has never had to contend with their mom's preoccupation with weight the way he did, so she doesn't understand how detrimental and hurtful her remarks can be, and that she's been trained to believe that their mom's behavior is normal when it's truly very unhealthy and cruel. I honestly didn't even speak a word during that entire dinner before Jake and his dad began defending me, so I don't understand how any of this could possibly be my duty to resolve. I was simply sitting there having dinner and aiming to get acquainted with his family, and then abruptly I was being assailed for my appearance and weight by someone who hardly knows me. Jake and I are going to take some time to determine how we wish to manage his family moving ahead. But for now, we're both certain that I don't owe his mom an apology or any sort of olive branch. If she wants to have a relationship with us, she'll have to admit what she did wrong and make some significant adjustments to how she treats people. Update 2. It's been over a week since the dinner disaster, and I thought maybe his family would just return to Germany, and we'd handle everything after some time had passed. But that's certainly not what occurred. His dad has been visiting our apartment nearly every day since the incident, typically in the afternoon when his wife believes he's out sightseeing or doing errands. Initially, I found this somewhat awkward, because I didn't know him well, and I wasn't certain what he wished to discuss. However, it turns out he's actually quite upset about what his wife did, and he wanted to apologize to me properly and ensure I was all right. He told me that he's been married to Jake's mom for over 25 years, and that he's observed her hurt Jake with her remarks about food and weight throughout his entire childhood, but he hadn't realized how bad it had become until he saw her do the same thing to me. He said that he always believed she would mature out of it, or that perhaps it was merely because she was concerned about Jake as her son, but witnessing her attack a complete stranger made him grasp that this is simply who she is as a person. He's been quite emotional during these visits, and he told me that he feels he failed as a father because he didn't shield Jake from his mom's toxic behavior when he was growing up. He said that he would try to discuss it with her at that time, but that she always claimed she was merely trying to keep Jake well, and that he wished not to create further discord in the house, so he would typically let it go. But now he says he understands that by not confronting her more assertively, he allowed her to harm Jake for years, and that he won't permit that to occur again. He told me that the day following the dinner, he faced his wife and insisted that she say sorry to me and concede that what she said was utterly unsuitable and painful. According to him, she flatly declined and began weeping and asserting that everyone was conspiring against her and acting unjustly. She told him that she was simply being truthful and that someone had to inform me of the truth regarding my weight before the wedding, and that she can't comprehend why everyone is so distressed about her attempt to assist. She also said that Jake has consistently been overly sensitive about food and weight issues, and that she was merely attempting to ensure I don't encourage his detrimental patterns. His dad said he told her that if she fails to apologize and alter her demeanor, she's going to forfeit her connection with Jake permanently, and that he will no longer condone her conduct. But she just continued to maintain that she's the wronged party in this circumstance, and that everyone is being unkind to her without cause. Meanwhile, Emma has been texting me several times each day, trying to persuade me to contact their mom and make things right. She keeps stating that their mom is truly hurt and distressed, and that she can't grasp why everyone is being so hard on her. Emma mentions that their mom has always been quite direct and frank about health and appearance, and that she was only trying to safeguard the family's standing. She also informed me that their mom has been weeping daily since the dinner, and that she believes everyone dislikes her and no longer wants her near. Emma thinks that if I simply phone their mom and talk to her, we can sort everything out, and the family can return to normal. But I told her that I won't pretend her mom's actions were acceptable just to make everyone feel better. Jake has been quite stressed about the whole situation because he sees his family as unraveling, and he feels stuck between defending me and upholding his bond with his parents. His dad keeps urging him to speak with his mom and make her see sense, but each time Jake attempts to mention it, she just begins to cry and claims he's being unkind to her. They are scheduled to fly back to Germany in a few days, and nothing has been settled whatsoever. His dad is genuinely concerned that if things aren't sorted before they depart, the family might never bounce back from this. He's been pressuring his wife to apologize, but she's only becoming more defensive and obstinate about it. Emma is also panicking because she says their mom is mentioning not attending our wedding if I don't apologize to her first, and she's worried that this whole matter will ruin Jake's relationship with his family permanently. She repeatedly states that family is more important than pride and that I should just put aside my feelings and establish peace for everyone else's benefit. But truly, I'm not going to apologize for being offended and assailed in my own home, especially when I actually did nothing wrong besides existing in a body that Jake's mom disapproves of. I feel like if I yield now and act like this is acceptable, it's simply going to establish the precedent that she can treat me as she pleases, and I'll merely endure it to maintain harmony. Jake agrees with me, but I can tell he's deeply distressed by the possibility of his mom not coming to our wedding and his family being irreparably harmed by this. He continually states that he fully supports me, but I know he's hoping that somehow everything will miraculously resolve itself before they have to leave. I'm genuinely beginning to be concerned that this entire situation could ultimately shatter their family entirely. And although I know it's not my fault, I still feel awful that my being in Jake's life has brought about so much turmoil and distress for all involved. Update 3. Well, his family returned to Germany yesterday, and I'm honestly uncertain about how everything concluded. The final few days before their departure were quite tense and uncomfortable, and nothing truly got settled as anyone had wished. His dad continued trying right up until the very last moment to get his wife to offer me an apology, but she flatly refused and actually appeared to become more unyielding about it as time progressed. According to Jake, she began asserting that she was the one who deserved an apology because everyone had been so unkind to her and made her feel unwanted and assailed during what was meant to be a joyful family visit. She also informed Jake that she believes I'm a negative influence on him because I'm causing him to go against his own family, and that she's concerned I'll alienate him from the people who care for him most. She stated that in Germany, families remain united regardless of circumstances, and that she cannot comprehend why he's opting to side with someone he's only been acquainted with for a few years over the mother who brought him up his entire life. Jake attempted to clarify to her once more that this isn't about selecting sides, but rather about fundamental respect and courtesy. Yet she simply wouldn't heed anything he was uttering. She continued to insist that everything she had said to me was factual, and that she was merely being forthright, and that if I cannot manage honesty, then perhaps I'm not resilient enough to be a part of their family. His father grew increasingly frustrated with her attitude, and on their final night here, he actually confided in Jake that he was ashamed to be married to someone so cruel and unreasonable. He mentioned he'd been thinking deeply about their marriage, and if this kind of behavior was something he wanted to keep dealing with for the rest of his life. That truly scared Jake, because his parents had been married over 25 years, and though they've had problems, he never thought they'd actually consider divorcing over something like this. His dad said this incident made him realize his wife has a pattern of hurting people and then refusing to take responsibility for it, and that he's tired of making excuses for her behavior. Emma was also getting really panicky about the whole situation because she could see her parents were fighting constantly and that her dad was seriously considering leaving her mom. She begged Jake to try to get me to call their mom and apologize just to smooth things over, but Jake told her he wasn't going to ask me to do that, and that their mom needs to take responsibility for her own actions. On their last day, his dad came over to say goodbye to both of us, and he gave me a really long hug and told me he was sorry about everything that happened and that he hoped I wouldn't judge their whole family based on his wife's behavior. He said that he was proud of Jake for standing up for me and that he thought I seemed like a truly good person who would make Jake happy. He also told Jake that he would certainly be coming back for our wedding next year, but that he honestly wasn't sure what was going to happen with his wife and whether she would be coming with him. He said that a lot would depend on whether she can come to terms with what she did and genuinely try to change her attitude and behavior. His mom didn't even say goodbye to me. She just stayed in the hotel room while his dad came over. Emma came with him, and she was quite emotional, and repeatedly saying that she hoped everything would eventually work out, and that the family could find a way to move past all of this drama. Now they're all on a plane together for about 12 hours, and I keep thinking about how awkward and tense that flight must be. Jake's dad and his mom have hardly spoken to each other for the past week, and Emma is caught in the middle, trying to keep everyone calm and peaceful. I'm wondering if being stuck together for that long might compel them to truly talk about everything that happened, or if it's just going to make things even worse. Jake has been quite quiet since they left, and I can tell he's dealing with many emotions about everything that went down. He repeatedly says that he doesn't regret defending me, and that he's pleased he eventually confronted his mom's toxic behavior. But I know he's also deeply saddened about the chance that this could have permanently damaged his relationship with his family. He's particularly concerned about his parents possibly divorcing over this entire situation, even though his dad confirmed to him that there have been issues in their marriage for a long time, and that this incident was just the last straw that caused him to realize he needs to make some changes in his life. We're both simply hoping that some time and distance will help everyone gain some perspective on what occurred and maybe find a way to move forward that doesn't require anyone to sacrifice their dignity or their values. But frankly, I have no idea what's going to happen next or how long it's going to take for things to return to any semblance of normal. Update 4. It's been precisely 1 month since Jake's family flew back to Germany, and I have some updates that are, frankly, quite surprising. I wasn't certain if I should post again because things have been evolving so quickly, but I imagine you all might want to know how everything concluded, since so many of you were invested in this whole mess. So evidently, that 12-hour flight home was in fact a turning point for his parents, but not as any of us had anticipated. According to Jake's dad, his mom spent most of the flight weeping and telling him that she was afraid she was going to lose her husband and her son over this entire situation. She informed him that she never intended to hurt anyone, and that she couldn't comprehend why everyone was so displeased with her, but that she was beginning to realize that maybe her perspective on matters wasn't as constructive as she thought it was. His dad stated that he had been intending to ask for a separation when they returned home, because he was so appalled by her conduct and her unwillingness to accept accountability for her actions. But seeing her become distraught on the plane and acknowledge that she could have been mistaken prompted him to resolve to give her one more chance to demonstrate that she was capable of change. When they returned to Germany, he informed her that the sole means for their marriage to endure was if she consented to attend counseling with him and endeavor to understand why her behavior had been so damaging and unsuitable. He stated that he would not spend the rest of his life justifying her mistreatment of others, and that if she wanted to have any form of relationship with Jake and me, she had to critically assess her dispositions and conduct. Much to everyone's astonishment, she indeed consented to begin seeing a marriage counselor, and according to Jake's dad, she's been taking it quite earnestly. Jake's dad said that she's been quite emotional during their counseling sessions because she's beginning to understand that her behavior over the years has hurt people she loves, and that her intentions don't matter if the impact of her actions is causing pain and damage. The counselor has also been helping her realize that commenting on other people's bodies and weight is never suitable, especially when it's done in a way that's meant to shame or control them. Meanwhile, Emma finally stopped texting me constantly, and instead she called me about 2 weeks ago to apologize for how she handled everything. She said that after thinking about it more and talking to some of her friends about what happened, she understood that she had been mistaken to expect me to fix a situation that I didn't create. She said that she was so accustomed to being the peacekeeper in her family that she automatically assumed it was her job to smooth things over, but that she comprehends now that her mom's behavior was unacceptable, regardless of her intentions. She said that she wants to have a fresh start with me, and that she hopes we can build a real relationship that isn't based on her trying to manage her mom's behavior or expecting me to tolerate things that aren't okay. She also said that she's been talking to Jake regularly, and that she can see how much happier and more relaxed he's been since he started setting boundaries with their mom. The greatest surprise happened about 2 weeks ago when Jake's dad called him and said that his mom wanted to have a video call with both of us. Jake was quite reluctant because he didn't want to place me in a situation where I could be harmed again, but his dad reassured him that his mom had been putting in a lot of effort in therapy and that she truly wanted to mend things. Last week we had this video call and his mom appeared entirely different from how she had at our dinner. She seemed somewhat diminished and quite sorrowful, and she began weeping almost instantly upon seeing us on the screen. She expressed in her halting English that she was profoundly apologetic for what she had said to me, and that she now grasped. Her remarks were harsh and unsuitable. She said she's discovered in therapy that her preoccupation with weight and looks stems from her personal insecurities and anxieties, and that she's been transferring those emotions onto others, including her own children. She told Jake that she was apologetic for harming him during his upbringing, and that she hadn't realized the extent of the damage she caused by continually remarking on his physique and dietary choices. She also said that she now comprehends that her actions toward me constituted a type of abuse, and that there was no justification for treating anyone in such a manner, particularly in their own residence when they were attempting to welcome her into their household. She told me that she does not anticipate my immediate forgiveness, but that she hopes that eventually we might build a stronger relationship founded on reciprocal respect and goodwill. Jake was quite emotional during the call because he stated it was the first time his mom had ever admitted her behavior was wrong or accepted responsibility for how she had treated him. She told him that she's dedicated to continuing with counseling and striving to change her attitudes and behavior, and that she aims to be a better mother and mother-in-law in the future. We ended up conversing for nearly an hour, and while things are certainly still awkward between us, I could perceive that she was making a genuine effort to comprehend what she had done wrong and how she could improve. She asked me about my job and my family in a way that felt respectful instead of judgmental, and she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, rather than simply focusing on my appearance. Following the call, Jake and I discussed whether we believed her apology was sincere and if we wanted to try to rebuild our relationship with her. We decided that we're willing to give her an opportunity to prove that she's genuinely committed to changing, but that we're going to proceed very slowly and uphold strong boundaries regarding what kind of behavior we'll accept. We sent her a wedding invitation a few days ago, along with a letter stating that we hope she'll be able to attend and that we're looking forward to continuing to cultivate our relationship. She called Jake the next day, crying and expressing deep gratitude for being included, promising to conduct herself well and treat everyone with kindness and respect. Emma is certainly planning to attend the wedding, and she's been very useful with some of the planning specifics, given her knowledge of what her parents would appreciate. She's also served as a go-between for us and their mom, helping navigate any potentially awkward situations, but in a supportive way, not like she's trying to manage everyone's feelings. Conditions are certainly not back to normal, and likely will never be precisely as they were prior to all of this occurring, but we are all dedicated to progressing in a healthier and more forthright manner than the family dynamics that were present previously. Jake has been seeing his own therapist to address some childhood issues this situation brought up, and I've joined him for a few sessions to help us establish boundaries with his family while still maintaining a loving relationship. We're getting married in a few months, and though I'm still a bit nervous about his mom attending, I'm mostly just excited to start our married life with a family dynamic based on honesty and respect, not fear and control. It's been a truly difficult journey to this point, but I think we'll all be stronger and healthier because of it. This next one will make your jaw drop. Currently, I work for my dad, and my younger brother is also part of the company. We operate a construction firm. I've been with the company since I was 14, handling office tasks during summers throughout my college years. After earning my degree and spending 7 years working elsewhere, I returned to the family business, and for almost 10 years now, I've been progressing into increasingly significant leadership positions. My dad is my boss, yet he isn't effective at delegating, managing, or mentoring. He's an excellent project manager, knows the industry inside out, and excels at his work, but he's certainly not a teacher or a long-range planner. Officially and somewhat by his actions, I appear to be his heir apparent. However, in truth, I'm simply handed a bit of everything without any actual ownership, and it's quite overwhelming. I'm currently responsible for some aspect of nearly every company division: IT, HR, management, accounting, office management, marketing, and in addition, I consistently receive construction projects to oversee. I began here as a project manager, and it's worth noting that none of our other PMs handle any other office or administrative duties, only me. I constantly attempt to transition out of project management, as it's challenging to prioritize tasks like employee reviews or revamping the website when you're perpetually drawn into project issues, which inherently must take precedence because they secure the mortgage. Yet, each time I'm nearing the completion of my current project, a truly promising opportunity emerges, and we lack the personnel to manage it. Consequently, I end up taking it on, and I'm once again committed to another 9-12 months of PM work, consuming 50% of my time. Every instance we've attempted to create a plan for me to assume a specific portion of my father's role or our CFO's role, it simply doesn't materialize. They are unable to genuinely relinquish control. Simultaneously, I'm just being assigned all the tedious tasks, such as ordering additional laptops or determining how to generate particular reports in our accounting software. These responsibilities don't appeal to me. I desire to focus on the big picture. I want to be strategic. We recently held a strategic planning retreat 2 months ago, which I organized, gathered the data and agenda for, and facilitated, all aspects I genuinely enjoyed. During that retreat, the decision was made for me to pursue financial training and transition towards the CFO role, moving away from project management. Last week, we secured a new 12 to 15-month project. And guess who is now the project manager? We just hired a new PM. And guess who is expected to train and mentor him, despite not being his manager? That's still my dad. I'm so exhausted from the pandemic and trying to comprehend how to perform my job, what my job even entails, and what any kind of path towards a role here that I enjoy looks like, that I've been quite disengaged for the past 2 months. Yesterday, my dad confronted me about it. He inquired, "Have you decided construction isn't for you?" It stung, and I attempted to explain everything I've mentioned, but I'm truly close to just saying, "Yes, construction isn't for me, I'm leaving," and essentially demolishing the last 10 years of a career I've been striving to build here. It would be considerably simpler to depart. However, I have immense pride in this company. It's practically another family member, and I appreciate that it's an ethical firm that fosters genuine careers and prioritizes its employees. Yet, I haven't been content here for some time. I enjoyed organizing and leading that strategic retreat, but now all that effort feels wasted because we aren't acting on any of it. I feel so trapped and see no escape other than simply ending it. My relationship with my father and brother would remain fine if I left. They would understand. The company would manage, or it wouldn't, and my dad would need to sell. I'm unsure. At some point, it's still just a business, not actually a family member, right? I know I possess skills that would improve this place, but I feel they are wasting away after years of hitting my head against a wall and receiving no direction, plan, or mentorship from anyone here, and feeling as though all my attempts to develop my role here are just me struggling aimlessly. My enthusiasm for this company has vanished. Perhaps it's just post-pandemic melancholy. But I do know I would feel incredibly liberated if I pressed the eject button. I could return to school, I could seek work or volunteer for causes I care about. I could be a more attentive mom and spouse if I didn't work here. Perhaps that's the correct route, to separate family and work and just let things unfold as they will. It's worth noting that my spouse also has a demanding career, working 60 hours a week for one of the tech giants, so balancing work and family is exceptionally difficult, with both of us holding career-oriented jobs and having young children. And while my income is beneficial to have, it isn't essential for our financial security. The same would not be true if we lost my spouse's income. Any guidance would be greatly appreciated. Update 1. Much has changed and much has not. Ultimately, I'm still with the family construction business, and I anticipate I will be for the remainder of my career. 2 points truly resonated with me after my letter was published. The first was that I didn't clearly articulate what I enjoy about my job, which you highlighted, so I reflected on that. On favorable days, I love my job because I get to solve problems, whether internally or on a project. Often I'm working to grasp processes, determine subsequent actions, facilitate communication, and discover solutions, and each day is distinct and full of possibility. I also appreciate my company because we are the kind of employer I believe all employers should aspire to be. We are here, yes, to generate profit, but also to enable our employees to have careers that support them throughout their lives. Only recently, one of our employees thanked me for this being a wonderful place to work, one that has supported her through real health issues, and she said she was glad I was starting to take charge as the next generation because she knew I would continue to maintain that culture of family. And just last night, I attended an award ceremony where one of our projects received recognition for the historical restoration of a building that was crumbling. This award-winning building is in my neighborhood. It's a place where my family enjoys gathering, where I now take my kids for the winter farmers market. It's a building that will be part of my larger community for the next 50-plus years, and my company did that work. Some days I feel a genuine, deep satisfaction. I really like and respect both my father and my brother, who I work with daily. My letter didn't convey any of that, and it was truly beneficial to list all that good stuff, because afterwards the tough issues I was focusing and wrote you about suddenly appeared less daunting. I also want to say thanks for all the advice that came from the commentariat that really helped me look at my situation differently. Specifically, I was quite startled by their charges of sexism towards my father. I found myself pretty insulted on his behalf, because he is the person who has consistently been my advocate. We've had frank discussions about the scarcity of women in construction and the reasons why, and he understands what this industry is like and doesn't think it should remain this way. He desires capable individuals in leadership roles, including capable women. He believes I possess the skills and ability to do it. We just haven't been able to determine how to get me there or how to get him to relinquish control. Ultimately, the comments made me realize I was causing a lot of this for myself. I was taking on the HR responsibilities. I was volunteering to handle the 401k administration, order the laptops, fix the website, and move into the financial side of the company. In short, I had to ask if I was being the sexist one by taking on all the administrative tasks that needed doing, when they didn't feel like actual steps upwards. I personally didn't need to manage any of it. I just kept taking it on because someone had to. Perhaps it was internalized sexism, or perhaps it was just being poor at delegating, but I finally saw it, thanks to all of you. So we've since hired a new office manager/director of HR at my urging, and OMG, yes, this individual is invaluable and now handles, enjoys doing, and performs well all of that administrative work I had taken on. The new PM I mentioned in the letter has since started, and I'm training him, which means he's learning to PM the way I want him to, and has been a great addition to our team. And we've also since brought in a vice president of marketing and design, who is potentially going to be our interim CEO, instead of me taking charge directly from my father. This makes a lot of sense in numerous ways, not only because he has more experience in the industry and with working as an executive, but also because his taking responsibilities from my father is simply less complicated. So now I'm back to being primarily a project manager, which I enjoy and am skilled at, with elements of being a manager. I'm still a leader here. I'm on the board of directors, and get to offer input on decisions and what direction we take. People seek out my counsel and ask me to resolve issues. And while the immediate prospect of taking over my father's role is gone, it's still very much the long-term plan, though the plan is less clear than it once was. It's on the agenda, don't worry. In the short term, I need to focus on securing projects so we can pay these new hires who are doing the work I don't want to, which seems like a fair exchange to me. Overall, I'm really proud of the changes I had this company make over the last year, and specifically the last couple of months, the hires, the new projects, the shifts in roles, and the leadership/accountability frameworks I've implemented. I value the perspective Allison and the commenters offered me. It helped me find a way through to the other side during a difficult period. Cheers, and thank you very much. Update 2, I wrote to you back in 2021 when I was trying to decide whether to remain in the family business, and in 2024 I sent you my update. I've since assumed the role of CEO, for better or worse, and am now confronting an ongoing issue for the first time as the leader of this company. We have 3 family members who are part of the business now. My father, majority owner and president, myself, CEO, minority owner, and my brother, VP, minority owner. My brother and I have the same ownership share, and the plan was that the company will transition to us, and we will be equal business partners. But my brother is unreliable. I suspect he may have depression, anxiety, or some type of mental health issue that he has never addressed, and it means he's often mildly untrustworthy, and then every once in a while he drops the ball in a spectacular fashion that leaves other people to clean up his mess. We've had discussions about this on a number of occasions over the past decade, But about 3 years ago, it truly seemed like he was doing much better. He was showing up, answering his phone, responding to emails, doing his job well, and actively participating in executive planning. He said he wanted to be here with me to lead our family business for the long term, and that felt wonderful. The idea of having a partner in this family business, where it can feel very high stakes and very lonely, was such a relief. My brother is smart and thoughtful, and I trust his judgment and views, which often differ from mine, a trait that's great in a business partner. Not long after that, long-term plans for ownership were being established, and actual ownership shares began to change hands. I thought my brother and I would be a great team, but 18 months ago, an incident occurred where he became uncommunicative for a week and left a project manager in the lurch. We had to scramble to find a subcontractor to finish our work. Eventually, he showed up and said he wouldn't do it again. Then a year ago, he left for his honeymoon, having completely failed to get a project with a hard deadline started, leaving me scrambling to make apologies to city officials, track down materials, ask for extensions, and generally get truly ticked off at my brother. Once he returned, I, in my father's presence, told my brother he needed to see a therapist, or somehow address his lack of dependability, or I would not go into business with him. He agreed and said he'd already talked to his doctor about getting a referral. Over the last year, I've asked a couple of times if he's made any progress with getting help, but he's always said he was waiting on insurance or for an appointment, and so on. Over the last month, he's gotten shaky again, being less and less responsive. Then 2 days ago, I found out he was leaving the country the next day for 2 weeks. He never told me. I found out from my mother. We once again have a project left in the lurch, making other people scramble. He left one of our crews short a member. He gave his guys only 1 workday of notice, and another employee is scheduling things that he should have scheduled. And I've recently discovered that he's delayed scheduling a kickoff meeting for another project for the past 3 weeks, disregarding the emails from an angry state PM. How do I handle this situation? I know I don't wish to be in business with my brother under these conditions. I stated that last year, and I meant it. I established a boundary. And here we are, and it's time to enforce this boundary. I know all of that, but I don't know what to actually do or what to actually request. My dad observes all this and supports me. My brother has been doing this to my dad for almost a decade, and I believe my dad is even more fed up and upset than I am. My dad is also somewhat of a hothead and a dictator. He wants to straight up fire my brother. I don't know. Perhaps that's best. But my brother possesses good qualities, good skills, and he is an owner, and he is my brother. What about a PIP? A leave of absence? A change in role? Removing him from leadership? Or did that ship sail last year? Part of what makes this so difficult is that I love him, and he's struggling at work due to very real, very challenging issues in his personal life. The other part is, I experienced the same childhood as my brother. We had an alcoholic mother, and my parents went through a terribly messy divorce, and all of that created issues around communication, confrontation, self-worth, and shame for all of us. Issues that I've worked hard to overcome through my own therapy and coaching. So I'm deeply empathetic to why my brother is the way he is. And I don't want to ruin my relationship with him or my sister-in-law, but I can't continue like this anymore. And ultimately, if we persist in this manner, the relationship is already damaged because I'm so frustrated and angry. And I could work with him somehow, probably, if he would just communicate with me. If he had simply told me he was going to be on vacation, that he had been ignoring these emails, that he was stalling out. We've tried saying, please, for the love of everything, just communicate, for nearly a decade, and nothing has changed. It's never truly gotten better, except for that brief period, 3 years ago. I've read through your archives looking for family businesses encountering similar issues, and this truly resonated. We're experiencing these problems, the blow to morale and people discussing leaving because family members are treated differently. So I know we need to change, and I know there's no way to do it without this being sad and painful. Any advice you could offer to help me figure out some options to move forward that fall between continuing what we're doing and getting the same result, and firing him as soon as he steps off the airplane, would be much appreciated. My brother returns in 2 weeks, and I need a game plan for what our conversation will look like. Update 3, June 17, 2025. The news is all positive, but the path there was not without its challenges. So when I wrote in, my brother had gone on vacation without providing any notice, again, leaving me and others in the lurch. Many commenters assumed he was entitled and spoiled, earning substantial money for doing nothing. But this was far from the truth. We're a medium-sized family business. All of us work diligently, and everyone, including the family owners, receives a solid livelihood. However, no one is earning Fortune 500 level money. And on the flip side, all the same executive pressures are present. The responsibility to sustain this business, to make sound choices so we endure a recession, competition, and changes in technology, workforce, and varying governmental requirements is intense. My brother was struggling under the pressure of living up to everything, particularly being torn between my father's expectations and his wife's expectations. He could meet neither, nor could he figure out how to discuss the reality of his capabilities and limitations with either of them. Then add the pressure of a highly successful older sister, who was his boss, into the situation. In simple terms, he was freezing and stalling when confronted with all that conflict. This is the aspect of family business that nothing and no one can truly prepare you for. People advise you to compartmentalize. They tell you to separate business from family. They tell you not to let the two worlds intertwine. But the truth is, you are always there, simultaneously being both a daughter and a manager, a sister and a colleague, a parent and a boss, a child and a subordinate. There is no separation, no donning different hats, no being two distinct people within yourself. You're simply one person, and there truly is no way to keep your family background from impacting your reactions to the other person, nor any way for the one manner in which you must relate to someone to avoid affecting the other way you relate to them. When it's good, it's truly good. But when it's tough, it's all the difficulties of family life merged with all the difficulties of business, which is indeed challenging. Thus, the very difficult decision I reached was to conclude that I needed to do what was best for the company, for my own benefit and that of all my colleagues, and to relinquish the rest. I had to accept potentially losing my relationship with my brother for the business's sake. Upon my brother's return from his trip, I placed him on unpaid leave and informed him that if he wished to rejoin the family business, he would need to resume a labor/field-only position, entirely without authority. My brother is indeed very talented and skilled in numerous aspects, just not as a project manager, so retaining his skills within our workforce was in the company's best interest, and I conveyed this to him. However, I terminated my brother's employment and informed him he would need to reapply for a new role, as his former position no longer existed. Then, as his sister, I let him know I loved him. I assured him I'd be glad to assist him financially while he was unemployed. I offered to help him locate a therapist, and I would gladly support him and his family in whatever way they required during this period, just not via the company. I made an effort to support him despite being the one dismissing him, and he never became angry with me. He comprehended everything. He understood he had disappointed everyone him, even as I was the one terminating his employment, and he was never cross with me. He perceived the whole situation. He recognized he had let everyone down. He understood my motivations for my actions. He departed the office that day feeling even more terrible and more intensely guilty about the entire affair. It took him roughly 6 weeks of unemployment, of grappling with the consequences of the events, and of finally being candid with his wife about it all, for him to reconcile with everything, but he managed. He now consistently sees a therapist, coincidentally my own therapist, which is beneficial since she is excellent, and he is beginning to address some of the unresolved issues from our upbringing. Eventually, he did return to work. Currently, on a daily basis, he is merely a mason, laying brick and block under the guidance of others. He had a temporary break from his ownership responsibilities, but he has now rejoined our executive team as he remains an owner and an officer. Those meetings occur after business hours, so they do not conflict with his field responsibilities. It's still a slightly odd arrangement, as it's still a family company, but he is doing his work well, and he is much happier now that his role aligns with his capabilities, and he's not continuously worried about dropping the ball or falling short of expectations. And so am I.